I'm the president of the board. We have several board members here, and to acknowledge them, if you would want to either physically raise your hand or put up a virtual hand, or, you know, who knows, there might be fist pump, peace sign, the above. Please do so now. Like I said, you can use your real hand.
Signing in for Tom Smith.
Thank you. All right, so we will begin. We have a great full agenda, and I'd like to start with our normal tradition of doing a pledge of allegiance as well as a pledge to the earth. So I will lead us off on that if you would like to join. So I pledge allegiance to
The flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands,
one
nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. And as someone noted, land acknowledgement, but I think this always works nice as well. Teach your children what we have taught our children, that the earth is our mother. Whatever befalls the earth befalls the sons and daughters of the earth. If men spit upon the ground, they spit upon themselves. As we know, the earth does not belong to us, we belong to the earth. As we know, all things are connected, like the blood that unites one family. All things are connected. And I think that's definitely how DCVA has treated the earth with the work that we've been doing and the people that participate. And it's always a great reminder that we need to let people know this without a doubt and understand it and respect it. All right, so moving on. Wanted to share some highlights. One of which I don't think we truly announced was Aurora. Aurora, do you want to say hello and introduce yourself as your new title?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Aurora Dizell. I'm the one sending out all the emails. I am the Operations and Administrative Manager for DCVA. I'm very excited to be in this role. I started with DCVA February 2020, so pretty much the duration of the pandemic. But the role that I'm in currently is new in the past several months. So yeah, thank you.
Yes, that is definitely an important highlight, and Aurora has been doing fantastic work. We can't say enough of the wonderful things she's been doing. And I wanted to share, so these are some of the highlights that I want to talk about. Thank you. I'll start from the bottom up. So many people that donated items to Darby Creek Valley Association this year, as well as, of course, monetary donations when we had made requests towards the end of the year. So work gloves, trash grabbers, shovels. Obviously, this is important for us because our main Keystone event is our cleanup, as well as helping to plant trees and rain gardens. So they definitely go a long way. It makes a huge difference. So speaking of which, a number of rain garden projects were complete either through our Stream Smart House Calls program or through Have a Rain Garden, in which we provide a support to that community effort, which was created by several people, including one of our board members here. And we also, again, with one of our board members here, last year started the Upper Darby Rain Garden program. And the idea there is to work with homeowners in planting rain gardens, obviously providing the services that are necessary to do that. And by doing this, obviously helps to promote that practice and getting people to understand, you know, why we need to prevent stormwater from running off into our waterways. It also helps to beautify the area. It brings in pollinators. Obviously, there's so many benefits. So if you haven't checked it out in our annual report or had heard any information about it and would like to know more, please let us know, in addition to maybe starting one in your own community, because it is just amazing the number of people that are willing to help out and do this work. So please let us know. In addition, Aurora created this Young Naturalist program. And from when she first started, it's just a great opportunity. So many kids and their parents have participated. There's great photos in our annual report that show, books that were read and different activities that take place. Again, if you hadn't heard about it, or people with young children that would like to participate, it's really a great opportunity to get outdoors with them. So I already mentioned Stream Smart House Calls, and then I would say one very important announcement that came out just before the end of the year was DCVA decided it was time to update its conservation plan. And I would say it's more than just an update that is our goal. We wanted to have a plan that really outlines ways that we can help reduce flooding in the lower portion of the watershed, communities that are disadvantaged and of course are bearing the brunt of all these activities that are occurring upstream, looking at ways that we can address climate change, as well as making sure that our activities and work that gets done in the county is inclusive, equal, diversifies not only the community around us and those that are aware of the essential needs of the watershed, but also that, there are green spaces and all the things that come along with a more robust, inclusive community in the watershed. So we partnered with Natural Lands Trust. They submitted a grant to Delaware County and received a significant award of $100,000 in order to complete this work. In addition, DCVA received an anonymous donation to put towards that as well, which will make us go a long way in gathering important information. There will be a series of community meetings, stakeholder meetings around this process so that we truly have a plan that will lead us into the next couple of decades. And as we all know, climate change is a serious threat and something that we definitely need to be on top of, in front of. And because we are one of the most urbanized counties in Southeast Pennsylvania after Philadelphia, of course, there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And not to say that there aren't many different organizations, obviously including ours, doing great work, but really having that guidance together will make a very big difference. So we're really excited about that and hope to have more information out soon where people could get involved and engaged. So with that said, let me share with us our agenda for today. So almost right on time, and apologies. We are in 2022. So that was the 2021 year end of year summary. Not to feel like you're going through like deja vu, Groundhog Day, or anything like that. That was 2021. And we have our wonderful EPA Remedial Project Manager, Josh Barber, who has graced us with his presence for many years now, that will give us an update on the Lower Darby Creek area Superfund site cleanup, as well as some other updates for activities occurring in Havertown. Then, as you can see, I will introduce each of the speakers as we get to that. We will have a break at 10:15, but we will hear from Haverford Parks and Rec, Delaware Riverkeeper Network, Conestoga High School, Haverford High School, as well as Radnor High School. So this is a great addition to our programming this year, having some of the high schools participate in our program. And then we'll have short updates at the very end. And one thing I wanted to note, because we made a slight change in the agenda, is that our annual meeting will immediately follow the close of, the board of directors meeting will immediately close the that, while we're still here, we're going to keep going. Obviously, if people need to break off, that will happen. but you're more than welcome to stay for that segment of the meeting. Usually, I would say it lasts about a half hour. We will approve our annual meeting minutes, our treasurer's report, as well as have our new board of directors voted in, as well as any existing board of directors that terms are up. And lastly, our Ribbon of Green Award. So without further ado, we will begin our meeting with our wonderful speakers. And for those that just joined, please feel free to post in chat any questions that you might have. We are holding questions to the end of each presentation. If you have any technical difficulties, again, please post in chat. Please keep yourself on mute to reduce background noise. And I hope you enjoy our event today. And I also want to mention that most of this was put together by our Vice President, Alan Stammel. So thanks to him for doing that. I'm just the speaking head for today. Okay, welcome everyone. And I will now turn it over to Josh.
Thanks, Jaclyn. Good morning, everybody. Hope everybody's doing well. I had sent a presentation over. So, all right, there it goes. All right. Excellent. Hopefully I've got the date right. I usually get mine wrong on every opening slide. So, I am Josh Barber. I'm the project manager for 2 Superfund sites in the area, the Lower Darby site, as well as Havertown PCP, which is located in Havertown. I'm going to provide an update on both of these as there's a lot of activity. I will, I've got several photos of kind of the ongoing construction work, but I will try and be as expedient as I can just to kind of go through everything and make sure there's plenty of time for questions. Next slide, please. So this is an overall map of the Lower Darby Creek area. This is a map that actually came from the proposal, the National Priorities Listing proposal back in 2000. I don't think I can point at this, but you can see, so Clearview Landfill and Foldcroft Landfill make up the Lower Darby Creek site source areas. They are the site proper. These are other properties between Clearview and Foldcroft that were considered for listing, but were not in the final listing. I include this map, even though it's dated, because these potential sources and the larger potential urban and suburban sources of runoff, as well as the Norwood landfill, are all going to come into play as I start talking about the work that we're doing with the aquatic sediments and environments cleanup. But I just wanted to reference everybody kind of where we are. You can see the airport to the south there in 95. All right, so back one slide real quick. I'm not going to go through the very painful process of discussing the Superfund process, but so basically Lower Darby is split up into 4 pieces, and I'm going to talk about each of those next. What you really need to know from this slide is that most of the Lower Darby site is in the feasibility studies phase, which is where you are evaluating cleanup options based upon the investigations that have been completed that have identified contaminants that are present in various media and the potential human health and ecological risks. The one part of the site that is further along is the Clearview landfill, which is OU1, operable unit 1. And I'm going to get into that next. And I apologize for my voice. Next slide, please. So we've been working at Clearview landfill and in the Eastwick neighborhood since 2000, when we started to clean up in 2017 with residential yards. So the work is ongoing. Oh, I'm trying to go fast. I promise. I'm going as fast as I can.
No. I'm sorry about that.
They're just
She has trigger figure or something
No,
like that. It keeps
I was
All
trying
right.
to click on something else and it changed the slide. Sorry about that.
I got the message. So so we started our cleanup with excavating contaminated soil from residential properties in Eastwick. That was completed last year, where we remediated approximately 200 residential parcels, where we were excavating soils that were contaminated with one or more contaminants, including lead, PCBs, and several polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, the most prominent of which was benzoapyrene, which is a very common contaminant for Clearview. It's a common urban pollutant as well, but we have elevated concentrations due to landfill operations in the soil. So that's all done. We also had several businesses that were previously located on the landfill in the Darby Township, Sharon Hill portion. The Clearview landfill is on the city of Philadelphia side of Darby and Cobb's Creek, but there's a small portion of the county of Darby Township that makes up most of the landfill. So those businesses were on that parcel. They were all relocated by January of 2020. Most were in 2019. There's a city park, the Eastwick Regional City Park, that's adjacent to the landfill property. That is the majority of that has been completed, where we've excavated 2 to 4 feet of contaminated soil and trash and consolidated that on the landfill. We've backfilled with clean soil and restored the surface with vegetation, grasses, and plantings. There's a little bit of work left to do this year with the completion of a mitigation wetland and a bioswale. The landfill itself, and I have maps that will put this into more context, excuse me. The landfill itself is being capped with what we call an evapotranspiration cover, which is an alternative cover that's innovative, and that instead of trying to repel precipitation and prevent it from getting into the cap itself and then into the waste, the ET cover, as we call it, is meant to absorb precipitation, hold it like a sponge, and then allow for the vegetation that's growing in the cover to absorb that water and use it. So that ET cover is about 20% complete. It's the last of three major tasks we have left to complete by the end of next year. We are, as I'll talk about, we have infrastructure funding that we're receiving for this cleanup, which is going to help to accelerate the overall work and get us done by the end of next year instead of into 2024 or 25. The stream bank along the landfill is about halfway done, and we're targeting getting that done by the end of the year as well. And then there is a large retaining structure that we're putting on the landfill in order to facilitate slope control and not impacting the floodplain. And that should be what we are currently not in construction season, but we are remobilizing on March 15th. And that wall should be done by the end of April once we remobilize. Next slide. All right. So to orient everybody, this map is kind of twisted. North is to your right, and you can see Cobb's Creek and where it joins into Darby Creek here. You can't see Darby Creek as it comes in, it's not highlighted. But ostensibly, everything in pink in the neighborhood represents the general area where we conducted remedial activities in residential properties. The areas that are in light green are all areas that have been previously remediated in the city park or on the landfill. And you can really tell where the landfill starts when you see the contour lines for the elevation start to tighten. That suggests that you're getting a steeper slope going up the hill, going up the landfill hill. The areas that are in dark green are areas that were remediated and completed this year. The big area in C is where our first mitigation wetland went in. The area along the creek is where we constructed additional cap. And the dark green areas kind of in right along the creek are where we've done different stream bank stabilization features. And I'll talk about the areas that we're going to work on later this year in a later slide. Next slide, please. So this in the upper, in this case, there's a map in the upper left-hand corner. The green star represents about where we were and when I took this photo. So this is along Darby Creek, where we used to have waste adjacent to the creek, in the creek, and slopes that were, or banks that were anywhere from 6 to 15 feet high above the water surface. And what you can see here is the finishing touches of a log crib wall that we've put in. This is an 800-foot long crib wall that's built with hemlock logs. And it's essentially, you can't see it because it's buried, but this crib wall goes 6 feet below the bottom of the creek. And it is all material that was excavated out. We dropped in prefabricated forms made of the logs, filled it with stone. And then once we got up out of the water table, we started to build upon that. And it's really like a very narrow log cabin that runs 800 feet from one end to the other. It is very solid, and it's there because we had erosion issues that were exposing the waste and transporting contaminated soils into the creek. So this is nearly completed here. In its final form, you'll see, I actually go to the next slide, please. Oh, I'm sorry. All right. Well, we'll stay on this slide. That last one, I have a few photos later on that show what that kind of looks like in its almost final form. But that's a structure that took the better part of a year to construct. It's we're all glad that it's done because it was quite the challenge dealing with the tidal environments. I know that my crew really appreciates being done with it. So this is an area in the Northern City Park, right at the edge of where there's the waste is capped. Actually, this area here represents a little area that we bermed next to the creek, which is going to be part of our, it is part of our mitigation wetland, and it's part of the cap, but it's wet. And it's there is waste that's below this area here. Next slide. But it's all permanently saturated waste. And this is looking at it from the other end. You can kind of see the, I'm standing on the low little berm here that's meant to retain this water. You can see the plantings that we put in. And in the background, you can see the landfill cap itself. This is kind of standing in the north and looking towards the south, towards the cap. Next slide. This is another angle a little bit later on. We had this area here used to be a big sedimentation basin. It was a very large bermed area. That berm has been removed, was removed last year, and we regraded it and created the topography and the hydrology to establish a mitigation wetland. On the right, you can see one of our outfalls. I'm like pointing at my screen. Can't you see me pointing at my screen? To the right, you can see a little outfall there, which is one of our 2 stormwater management discharge pipes from the landfill cap itself that are feeding into this mitigation wetland, which is also a stormwater management area. There's a next slide. We then planted this area. This is now looking at it from the opposite direction, kind of out toward the creek is in the background there. This is our mitigation wetland for what we call Area C. And all of these are tree tubes that are protecting the wetland shrubs and the cuttings, as well as the evapotranspiration cover plantings from deer browsing. And this year we planted around over the entirety of the area. We generally plant around 1,000 trees and shrubs per acre. And we planted about 4 or 5 acres this year. So this represents that wetland in the late summer, early fall. Next slide. So just to reference the map in the upper right-hand corner, now we're back over right near the confluence of Darby and Cobbs. And this is a cross-section of the retaining wall that we're building along the western edge of the landfill next to the creek. And we needed to build this retaining structure because if we had not, we have very steep slopes. We can have no more than a 3-to-1 slope for the landfill cap when we're done. And if we were to meet that, we would have been building the landfill cap into the 100-year floodplain. We couldn't steepen it, the cap, because we would have been exceeding our slope requirements. So this retaining wall, which is built out of a material called Ready Rock, which are stackable blocks that are 2 to 4 tons in weight, is built right at the edge of the 100-year floodplain. It's about, it'll be 2,200 feet long when it's done. And it essentially resets our slope so that the top of the landfill cap will be able to come down to the top of this wall and allow us to cap all of the waste, but prevent any kind of impacts to the 100-year floodplain. So these are just some cross sections. Basically what we've had to do here is pull back the waste, put down a filter liner, and then there is if you go to the next slide, you can see there's a foundation that's built on the waste, and we have to over excavate about 4 feet. We put down a geotextile material that's reinforced, and upon that we place stone and foundational materials, and then compact that. And then the base bricks for this wall are embedded halfway into the ground and stay, and that basically prevents them from moving. And then once that's done, the hard part's done. And we then have to stack this wall up, and it goes anywhere from 6 to 9 feet high, depending where you are on the landfill. And this is looking south down Darby Creek along the western side of the landfill. Next slide. This is further down. If you look at the map, we're down near the bend in Darby Creek, where this is the material that we had to excavate into in order to put down the geotextile, and upon which we built the wall foundation here as we're coming around the bend. And this is largely, we believe it to be incinerator ash and general daily fill and cover material. Next slide. And this is looking at it from the other direction. You can see how the base blocks, these blocks are 3 feet tall and they're 4 feet deep, and then they're filled with stone. And we embed the blocks halfway up their surface, so 18 inches. And then we had a pretty steep rise as you go up from the out of the floodplain. And so we had to build steps for this wall so that the blocks could perfectly meet up and then interlock. They really do work like Lego blocks. There's no mortar that's needed. And this was all completed late last year. Next slide. So for this year, this is what we want to do. Like I said, we're going to remobilize in March 15th of this year, and we will complete that retaining wall. The foundation was completed on December 23rd, right before we shut down, and the rest of it now will just be stacking and backfilling behind it. We want to complete the interim grading over the remaining 35 acres of landfill that haven't been capped. And we want to get the ET cover over at least 20 of those acres, primarily the part of the landfill that's facing the Eastwick neighborhood. And that's what we want to complete this year. We also want to finish the remaining stream bank stabilization that's on the eastern side of the stream where the lit waste is present. And there's a basin that is our large stormwater basin that drains the part of the cap that faces Eastwick. And that's referred to as Area B. And so Basin B drains Area B. And we want to get that regraded just like we did for that other one I showed you, only it's much larger, and convert that into mitigation wetlands, at least the grading and the hydrology this year, and then we'll plant it in the spring. Next slide. So this is a map that kind of shows what it was that I'm talking about. So everything in the blue or the purple is where we need to complete the interim grading. And then the kind of purple lavender color is where we want to finish the cap. Just to the south of this, the big purple blob where you can see that oblong shape, that's Basin B, and that's where we'll do that other mitigation wetland. That's one of our big stormwater management features. And then along the creek in orange is the remainder of where we need to complete the stream bank stabilization. And in red is the length of the Ready Rock wall. Next slide. I don't know if, I know some of you are aware, right before we demobilized in the end of December, the EPA administrator, Governor Wolf, Representative Scanlon, and some other high-level officials from EPA and local government were at Clearview to announce the Superfund portion of the Build Back, the Building a Better America, Build Back Better plan, the infrastructure bill, which is providing about $3 billion to Superfund. And they were here at Clearview. This is the speaking area that we lined up. Next slide, please. And you can see actually on that slide, there's a link to the recording for the full event if anybody missed it. These are just a few photos that includes, Ted Pickett, who's the leader of the CAG that works with DCVA TAG. And then there's several other folks that are in these pictures. I just wanted to just kind of highlight this because it was a big event. It's big. It's great for Superfund. It's great for this site because we're getting additional funding to accelerate our cleanup. Because I didn't screw anything up when all these high-level folks were there. They agreed to keep giving me money to complete the cleanup, so that's nice. And it was a great event. It was perfect. If you remember, like it was not December weather. It was like 65 degrees and sunny and no wind. And the next day it started pouring and it was 30. So we really lucked out, but it was great. Next slide. And this was prior to that event. On the right there is my new regional administrator, Adam Ortiz, and he met with myself and Darren and then several members of the CAG. So that was a great, Adam is really, he comes from Maryland, and he is very interested and enthused about community engagement, and he wanted to meet the CAG and before this event face to face. And so we had a good meeting there in the Eastwood Park on the basketball courts before we got started. Next slide, please. So I'm gonna, I don't know how I'm doing on time here because I want to leave time for questions. Okay, I think we're good. 1 second. Jaclyn, you don't want me to stop for any questions until the end?
Well, it's up to you. I did ask people to hold
Right.
until the end because we wanted to make sure you got through.
Yeah, let's
right.
make sure you get through, Josh. That's
All right, I'm going as fast as I can. And I really apologize. My voice, it doesn't hurt as bad as it sounds, but I'm sure it's painful to listen to. So I'm sorry. So there's all these other parts of Lower Darby. We just talked about Clearview. I'm going to talk about the other parts real quick. So Fulcroft landfill is, first of all, we have a new contract with Tetra Tech for all of the Lower Darby site. Tetra Tech has been working on Clearview for a long time. We now have a contract with them that covers all the support needs we have for the rest of the site. And Fulcroft is, as I said at the beginning, it's in the feasibility study stage. The PRPs, the group of responsible parties, of which there are 19 that are performing the feasibility study with EPA oversight, should be submitting the feasibility study to EPA and DEP and the Fish and Wildlife Service for review in September of this year. And that's a FS that's going to be looking at addressing the soil contamination and the lack of a final cover, as well as the stream banks at Fulcroft, looking at alternatives on how to address that, as well as dealing with the groundwater contamination. Next slide. For Clearview, we call OU3, Operable Unit 3, is the groundwater at Clearview. And we're in the middle of the feasibility study there as well. We are working on, I don't have a map in here, but there is a very large plume or plumes of groundwater contaminants that are in the overburden above the bedrock. And that material, that contamination discharges into the creek. And it also has a very large plume that goes east-northeast towards Penrose Plaza up by Island Avenue, for those of you that are familiar with the area. It's about a half-mile long plume of 1,4-dioxane, which is a historically used stabilizer, and PFOA and PFOS, which I'm sure most folks in this group are familiar with, and I won't go into that, but it's an emerging contaminant that we're dealing with. And there's also arsenic and other low-level things, but those are our major issues. So we're looking at, prior to addressing the larger plume, cutting off the groundwater as it leaves the waste boundary. So it's going to be an interim cleanup called an interim remedy, which is quicker. And we're in the middle of the FS looking at options on how to address that. And one of the things we're also doing is we've sampled the groundwater and then the pore space in the sediment within Darby Creek for all of our site contaminants, including PFOA and PFOS. And it's present there. And these are the results from 2019 that show the concentrations. As a reference, we generally look at 70 parts per trillion for either PFOA or PFOS or a combined number from like a drinking water health advisory level. Nobody's drinking this water, but we have levels that are in the groundwater and in the pore water that are well above 70. So we are going to be conducting PFAS and 1,4-dioxane sampling in the surface water, sediment, and pore water. This was all located at Clearview previously. Now we're going to conduct it from upstream of Clearview all the way down through past Fulcroft into the Hines Refuge down to the Delaware. We're coordinating with the EPA Urban Waters Program and the DRBC on this. We're also coordinating with Pennsylvania DEP as we develop our plans. And we will be, we're developing a sampling plan now and a communication strategy depending on what we find. And that sampling plan will be provided to the CAG and the TAG for review. That's atypical for most Superfund sites, but I like sharing our draft documents rather than the final for review and technical input. So this is something that we're targeting for doing spring and summer of this year. Next slide. As I said, we're in the middle of the FFS for OU3. We are looking at many different technologies. We're looking at doing things in situ, in the ground, to either whether it's injections or reactive barriers, hydraulic control through both engineered and natural means to prevent these contaminants from moving beyond the waste boundary. We're also looking at enhancing natural bacterial degradation that happens with some of these contaminants already. So that's something that will also be done later this year. Next slide. In the fall as well, which I will provide to the CAG and the TAG for review. We're targeting a public plan being released for public comment on the interim cleanup in the spring of next year, and hopefully having a final record of decision for this interim cleanup by the end of next year. Now, this is a very aggressive schedule, but we want to get this done. There's an opportunity with the increased funding to accelerate a lot of things, and this is another one of the things I'm trying to accelerate. Next slide. The last part of Lower Darby is the aquatic environments, and it's really all of the wetlands and tributaries that feed in to the areas that are potentially impacted by Clearview and Fullcroft. The Superfund site is always defined by wherever contamination has come to be located. This represents our general assessment area where we've already done sampling in fish tissue, snapping turtle tissue, sediment, surface water, both surface and deep sediment as well. And we're in the FS stage. Next slide. So we have a lot of it. While we collected a lot of data during the investigation for OU4, we have more data to collect. We have additional data gaps to address regarding upstream background sources from various tributaries. We need to look at certain other data gaps that we have. We have a large, we need to establish a long-term monitoring program for biota in the aquatic ecosystem. And we have a large flood model that we've developed with the EPA Office of Research and Development that evaluates the migration of contaminated sediment during different flood events. And that accounts for storm surge as well as sea level rise. So we need to get that group additional sediment data before the next big storm event or whenever we're ready to sample, and then also get post-flood data to them to help look with plan for our long-term monitoring. So there's a lot of prep that goes into this. We're targeting sampling spring or summer of next year because we want to line everything up appropriately. And that there's no date yet for when that sample plan will be developed or ready to review, but it most likely will be later this year, and then also be given to the CAG and TAG for review. Next slide. Another big part of all of this is fish consumption. We know that the highest level risks we found were from fish and turtle tissue in our risk assessment. This is from fish that we sampled. And we are working on an outreach plan. We've been working hard to talk with the Friends group at Hines, as well as local municipalities, Fish and Wildlife Service, DEP. We've identified some different groups that we think have a higher potential for fish consumption, and we're working on communication efforts as well as informational materials, and then actual ways to help offset, if people actually listen to the advisories that we're developing, to offset their diet if they're on a subsistence or recreational form of consumption of those fish, trying to do the best that we can to help increase the odds of people actually, even if they take to heart the advisories that we're working on for fish consumption, they may not be able to, move forward with them if they need to eat. So there's a lot that's going on with that, and I will have more to provide on that as we move forward this year. Next slide. Okay, site 1 is down. Next site, it's going to be quicker. So Havertown PCP is an old site in Havertown. It's at the intersection of Eagle and Lawrence Road. It's the former National Wood Preserver property that was a wood treater facility starting in the 20s up through the 50s. And this is an old site that was capped. These are our groundwater collection areas that were previously in place. You can see our treatment building that's highlighted there, where we were treating all the groundwater that we collected. And this site had been handed over to the state for operation and maintenance in 2013. And then in 2019, early 2019, during the government shutdown, we were contacted about groundwater that was seeping into the yards and the basements of several homes on Rittenhouse Circle. Long story short, we found contaminants in that water and that soil in the basements, and EPA initiated a time critical response action in 2019, where we ultimately waterproofed 10 different residential properties, and we excavated contaminated soil from 4 yards, and then we put in numerous other features to collect additional water. We attribute this situation occurring because in 2018, we had a dramatic increase in precipitation rates, and that raised the water table, that brought the contamination that was in the groundwater up near the surface and discharging into these areas. The backyards on Rittenhouse Circle are former tributary to Nailers Run, so they're naturally wet anyway. So that's why we think it happened. Next slide, please. I'm not going to go over all of this, but there's a long history at Havertown. And what's highlighted in yellow is what we're doing now. Under our removal program, which is my counterpart programmed, within Superfund in the region, conducted all this work. We are expanding the groundwater treatment plant that was there because it did not have the capacity to handle this additional water. We're working on all the administrative documentation that we need in order to do this. We took this site back over, at least the plant component, back over from DEP in May of last year. And now we're working on building the new treatment plant. Currently, there's a temporary treatment plant in place. Next slide, please. So this is just a rundown of what the removal's done. It's not 10 residential properties, it's 8. We have easements that we're securing with all the property owners for the infrastructure that we had to put in to convey all the water that we're collecting from their basements or the springs in the back of their yards, or the other groundwater collection trenches that we put in. And I have a map that shows all of this. All of that's done. And now we are in the groundwater treatment plant expansion phase, where the old plant is demolished, it's gone. And we have a temporary plant that's in place that's treating 100 gallons per minute. That's being run by the removal program. And then the expanded plant construction should be starting this spring with the foundation, and then moving on and being done by the end of 23. Next slide. So this is kind of the YMCA is off to your right across Eagle Road. This is where the temporary plant is housed at the site. Next slide. This is kind of back towards the western end of the property. Mr. Storage is to your right there. For those of you that are familiar, we're looking straight towards the YMCA lot. And this is where the temporary or the permanent plant used to be. That's been demolished. And you can see generally the outline for where the new treatment plant foundation and structure will go. Next slide. So this is a map that shows the deep and shallow I should have said this. Pentachlorophenol is our main contaminant of concern at Havertown. It's not the only one, but PCP is the main indicator contaminant. It's we have a cleanup goal of 1 part per billion in groundwater. This map shows the concentrations and the overall extent of the plume. I want to kind of highlight in the red circles in the shallow plume in the lower right hand side. That's where we saw the increased concentrations, and the wells that are down near Rittenhouse in the smaller red circle are where we saw the upwelling into the yards. Next slide. This was 2021, where due to natural conditions as well as the groundwater extraction network, the plume extent was smaller. This plume, the groundwater contamination, especially in the shallower aquifer, it's generally shrinking, but it doesn't go from the previous slide to this slide that quickly. It kind of like pulses depending on the time of year and the elevation of the water table, which is why we've put in additional groundwater collection features. Next slide. So what I've highlighted here is the new infrastructure components, and it's hard because I can't point at this, but what I've highlighted here, starting in the lower right-hand side, that blue line is a header line that runs behind a lot of these houses. That's conveying all the water that's collected from the new sumps that are in the 8 residential basements and crawl spaces collecting water. They're state-of-the-art sump pumps with battery backup, dual pump lead lag. In the yellow there's a spring sump that was discharging. There's a large outdoor sump there where a lot of this water that's collected from the sumps goes to, which then heads over to our new large collection sump that's on our property called CTR1. And then there's a secondary trench that was put in on a residential property, which I won't name the address, but it's on Rittenhouse, that was kind of ground zero, where we had pure product upwelling. That's where we did the deepest excavation in their yard to remove contaminated soils. We also pumped out some free product that was present in the shallow water table as well. And then we have a new force main in red that conveys all this water back to the plant area where the temporary plant currently is located and the new plant will be constructed. That force main was drilled horizontally. It was under the YMCA parking lot and under Eagle Road without any major disturbance to the surface. That was done last year. Next slide. So the other thing that we need to finish is, because we saw this contamination upwelling into a certain area, we drilled additional borings in the bedrock up to 260 feet deep, which are the deepest wells that have ever been drilled on the site. And we found high concentrations in some of these wells at varying levels. The highest concentrations were up to 1,300 parts per million. And we've definitely found closer to the source area evidence of pure free product in those borings. We're currently in the process of doing what's called packer and pump testing, where we're testing different intervals of fractures in the bedrock in these borings to see which zones generate the most flow when we pump them, as well as what are the highest concentrations of contaminants. Because eventually the plan is to convert more of these big borings, which are 10-inch diameter, into recovery wells that will then provide additional capture and flushing of contaminants from the plume back to the plant. Next slide. This map, so for reference, it's really hard to see, but the area on the left where there's kind of a gap in the plume, that's roughly where the Mr. Storage and the cap is located. And these boxes are calling out the borings and the different intervals where we had high concentrations of PCP. And what I've done is I've highlighted in red the deeper parts of the borings, and every site for every boring, the green star represents the highest concentration. So you can see where the plant used to be located, that blue rectangle. And to the left and the right, we have, that's where we've seen free product present in the wells. And our deepest boring there was 130 feet. Some of these borings are deeper, where we had upwards of 4,600 parts per billion of PCP there. This is, I don't think that this plume map is really, the plume isn't really shaped like this. This is kind of how it's drawn in the software. But the point is that we have contamination that's deeper in areas where we didn't think it was based upon historical borings. Not to pass the buck, but I was in the RPM when all that stuff happened. That was 80s and 90s type stuff. I was still in high school for a lot of that. So I'm going to totally pass the buck on that one. But now we are in the process of delineating the extent. So we're doing this packer testing now, but we're going to be conducting, if you go to the next slide, I think I have one more slide. Oh, I don't, go back, I'm sorry. So this year, what we're doing is a new drill program later this year where we need to further expand vertically and horizontally to drill more wells based upon the findings of what we're going to get out of the packer testing that's happening right now and should be completed by March 18th. That's the rundown there. I'm sorry I took longer than thought. I've got, I guess, 7 minutes for questions. I don't know how, and Alan, I don't know if how you want to handle this, or Jaclyn.
Yeah, George had a question. George had a question early on. George, I can either read it, or if you want to ask the question directly, go right ahead.
Yeah, I'll ask it. I noticed in one of your earlier slides down in the presentation were a gaggle of Canadian geese, and it reminded me of the construction of the Blue Route, and retention basins that on and off ramps were constructed and populated with mitigating plants, and it cost $5,000 to put the initial plantings in, and within a month, Canadian geese had eaten all of the plants. Then an additional $3,000 was spent to put in new plants, and within a month, the Canadian geese had eaten all the plants. I'm wondering if you're aware of that's kind of a situation, and I'm sure you're aware of the importance of plants doing their absorption mitigation responsibilities after they've been put in the ground, and what you might be doing to prevent something like that happening at your site.
So that's a good question. So we had the tree tubes on the trees and shrubs, and I don't think the geese are very interested in those anyway. We have not planted any wetland plants there yet. What we did was, prior to putting down the erosion material, we put down a growing substrate and then a wetland seed mix. This seed mix is spread over about an acre, and it costs some insane amount of money. I think it was maybe like $1,000 a pound, something like that. Getting upwards of I don't know what prices. So we have not done the second wetland yet. We have biologists that are going to come out in the spring to inspect everything and see how it's growing. We do have plans to plant wetland plants in areas that are needed, but the hope is that that seed mix will generate the types of species that we want to see there, and then we can supplement it. But I will honestly tell you that I'm going to defer to my biologists when they come out there. And we haven't talked about the geese yet. We're more concerned about the deer, but I can definitely bring that up to them, and they would have a more intelligent response on how we're going to handle that.
Fairmount Park built a series of man-made wetlands in the park because they were losing species, and when they talked to the Academy of Natural Sciences, they found that they were losing them because they were habitat specific and needed wetlands, and Fairmount Park admitted that they were removing wetlands in the park, so they put them back in, and they put plantings in. Biohabitats out of Baltimore area did all that work, but I've been monitoring that man-made wetland at Cobbs Creek Environmental Center for 20 years and have records of what went in and what survived and what didn't, and some of the impacts. So,
well, if you ever want to come down, if you want to come down to this one, you're more than welcome. We will be there daily starting in March. So you're more than welcome if you ever want to come down and take a look. I would welcome you.
So Josh, I do have a question about the PCP site.
Yeah.
So there's been a lot of construction actually on top of the cover. Is there any concern or indication that some of the movement may be because the cover has been broken or anything like that because of that construction work? I know that it's on a pad, but it looks like just kind of wondering if there's any thought that there's movement from underneath that cover.
No, I don't really think, I don't think, so one, I don't think that a lot of the contamination and that we're worried about is even underneath the source area anymore. I think most of the material that we're worried about is south of there, kind of under Eagle Road in the bedrock and under like the parking lot of Tony Roney's and kind of under part of the YMCA where we have free product, which is acting as an ongoing source. When Mr. Store, so that site, that cap is, there's a geosynthetic liner. And then there's anywhere between 2 to 10 feet of soil on top of it. And we had load requirements and design requirements put on the property that were designed by the Army Corps of Engineers. And when Mr. Storage built there, they had to get everything approved by us to make sure that they were doing it consistent with those controls. So we haven't seen any settling. They never reached the cap liner when they constructed the building. And we've recently, as part of our work, we've exposed the liner in the drainage basin between Mr. Storage and where our plant was. And that's still competent as well. We've had to expose that because we're going to have to, in order to expand the building, we're going to need the foundation, and that material is going to have to be removed, and that liner is going to have to be removed and put deeper in order to put the foundation on top of part of it. So I haven't seen anything that would suggest that, no.
Okay, thanks, Josh. I know we're right up to the wall here with.
I mean, I can go longer. I know you've got an agenda to stick to.
Yeah, I know you can go longer.
Yep.
That's never been an issue.
So I know.
The clock has always been the issue.
Yep.
So great talk. Thank you.
Yes, it's great information. Thanks, Josh.
I can also answer, I mean, if there's any verbal questions now, I can do like one more and I can answer. I haven't looked in the chat, but I know there were questions. So I can answer any other ones that are in there if you want.
Yeah, that'd be
Yeah.
great. Do the chat.
Yeah, if you could do that, that would be great.
All right. I'll do that.
No one else? All right, great.
I guess
Thank
that's
you.
it for me. Thank you all. I appreciate it. I'll be listening in for a little bit longer. And then we got to get to swim practice. So, you know, enjoy
That's
the rest
okay.
of your meeting.
Yes, thank you. For
I would say anytime anybody wants to come down to Clearview, you're more than welcome. I'm happy to give tours. Like I was saying to George, I can take anybody on the city of Philadelphia part. I can't take you on the privately owned part, but anytime you're curious, we're always there.
That would be great, actually, Josh, if we can, I don't know if DCVA can put something out there to its members
Sure.
and organize a day to go and see that.
We're doing so many site tours now. I'm ready to start charging an admission. So
Okay,
I will
all right.
give you all, I'll give you all a free pass.
Discount. Oh, okay, free.
No, free.
Say
you know.
discounted.
So thank you all.
Sounds good. Thank you. All right, wonderful. So moving on, we have Jesse Hart, who's the program coordinator for Haverford Parks and Rec. That's going to give us a short little overview of their Riparian Forest Buffer Grant. And let's see, Aurora already has the presentation up. And Jesse, are you here?
I'm ready to go.
Okay, there you are. Thanks.
Thanks for the introduction, and thanks everyone for being here today. I'm really excited to share some of the work that we're currently doing. I want to start by thanking DCVA not only for allowing me to speak today about some of the work we're doing in our municipality, but also for all of the work they do throughout the county and the watershed. And for us in particular in Haverford Township, they've been a constant source of consultation and guidance and advice. In particular, getting us our recreation and environmental center and writing letters of support for all of these grants. So DCVA has been a great partner for us. A little bit about me. My name is Jesse Hart. I'm the program coordinator for Haverford Township Parks and Recreation. Been with the department for a little over 5 years. I have a background in environmental studies. I'm a PHS tree tender, licensed applicator, and soon to be a master watershed steward, I hope. So looking forward to that. Before I dive into this particular grant, I want to give a little bit of background about some of the work we're doing. A lot of you, I think, will may be familiar with some of it. I know how dedicated the DCVA team is to this work, and I think some of you will appreciate it. So historically, the Township Parks and Recreation have planted about 150 to 200 trees every year through a Tree Vitalize grant, which is a program through the Horticultural Society. And I've been in an increasing role in that grant program for the last 5 or 6 years. It truly shows the value of the work, and you can see the rewards that are we're reaping on our property at the reserve, and now we're kind of spreading it more broadly throughout the township. You really see the sense of community. You have scout groups come out, we have religious groups come out, we have retired folks come out, families. So it's a great sense of community, and it's amazing to see what can be accomplished when we work together. We also plant through the Tree Tenders group, which is a horticultural program. So moving on a little bit to what we're doing now, our work really ballooned during COVID. We were able to do a lot more. We were doing less of a normal recreation activity, so we were allowed to get out on the trails more and use that opportunity to really attack some of the invasive species that were taking over a lot of our roadsides, parks, and trails. And we realized that there was a great interest throughout the municipality from residents that wanted to see something done about some of these invasive species and helping out our riparian forest buffers. So we thought there would be a real potential to have an impact here. And one of the most important things was that there was some funding available. So we were able to apply for a few new grants. So if you could go to the next slide, please, I'll get into this particular program. So just an overview of this grant that we have just recently received through DCNR. It's a $50,000 matching grant. So they're gonna reimburse us for $50,000, and we'll put in $50,000 plus of our own staff, volunteer, and equipment time. It's a 4-year time horizon. So we're gonna begin the work this year, and we have 4 years to complete it. We're hoping to front load a lot of that work and do a lot of our planting in this year and next year, so that years 3 and 4 can be maintenance and replacing any trees that maybe have gotten lost along the way. The grant does include 750 trees and shrubs along Cobbs Creek and Darby Creek. I'm going to be focusing on Darby Creek for this presentation. We also have 300 live stakes for anyone who's familiar with that type of planting. We'll remove invasive species along the trail. And we're also going to include semi-permanent and permanent signage, which we feel is extremely important. It educates the community and shows the value of the work we're doing. And we'll consult with experts in our historical societies so that we have the appropriate verbiage on that signage. In total, the grant includes approximately 5 acres, a little more than that. Next slide, please. This is the actual location that we're doing along Darby Creek. So that center picture is the map. You can see 476 running along the middle of it. And there are various small yellow boxes spread throughout there. On the northern end, that's where the Havertown Township bus yard is, for those that may be familiar, just to orient you. And then on the southern end, that's Mary Place, which is the popular park throughout the township. This location runs along Darby Creek and has a macadam path that was put in 10 to 15 years ago through help and support by DCVA, and it's one of our most popular trails throughout the township, and has really grown in use since COVID. You can see in the top right picture a picture of that path. So some of the different locations, they really vary. On the top right, the one that I mentioned was an area that was covered in knotweed, and this is more recent picture. So we've knocked down a lot of the knotweed, and this is kind of in the middle phases of the work we're doing. But that's one of the projects that we're going to be working on next year. On the left-hand side, you'll see a more open area with less forest cover. There's a lot of multi-floor rows and vines growing in there. So we've gone in and mowed down that property, which I'll talk a little bit more about. And then on the bottom right, this is one of our more interesting and more visible sites that we're going to be planting. So it's right along Glendale Road, if you're familiar with it, and I'll give you a couple more close-ups throughout. But this area was head high in vines, multi-floor rows, other invasives that we've since knocked back and mowed down. So we're going to continue to be doing some of that work. Next slide, please. These are a couple of our before pictures. at various locations. So the top left and the top right are both pictures of porcelain berry. You can see, which is an invasive vine that grows up trees. It can pull them down. It can suck nutrients out of them. So the top left, you see a wall of porcelain berry growing up the trees and pulling them down. And then in the top right, you see a road sign that's being blocked by porcelain berry, which is a heavily used road in our township. So it's supposed to be telling people to slow down, and it's covered in that porcelain berry. In the bottom there, you see Japanese knotweed, which is a problem all throughout our waterways and one of the more difficult species to eradicate. And I'll talk about that a little bit more on the next slide. Next slide, please. So what we've done already and what we're going to be doing, we've, for the last couple of years, been attacking a lot of these invasive species. We've cut vines along the length of that macadam path. We've done that over the past 2 years, and what used to be a wall of vines is now you're able to see through, and you can see the trees starting to branch out a little bit more, and they're healthier, and will kind of stabilize that bank. So we're helping out what's already there and some of our existing native species, and it also allows us to plant additional species. The second picture down there on the right is one of our volunteers cutting down some knotweed, which is a really aggressive vine, or a really aggressive invasive. It will take us a couple of years to truly control. We're not going to think we can eradicate it, but we hope to control and mitigate the effects. So we will keep going at that Japanese knotweed. The third picture down there is the site I mentioned on the previous page. So what had been head-high vines and other shrubs is now a cleared site, and we're going to mow it again this spring and then plant in the spring or fall of this year. So it'll be a nice planting site right along Glendale Road with flowers that you can see from the trail and from the road, and some oaks and maples and other native species. The picture down there on the bottom right is that same sign along the road that's been freed of some of those vines. Some of the invasives that are along this trail in particular, I've mentioned already, there's multiflora rose, there's knotweed, Japanese honeysuckle, tree of heaven, and there's so much more there that we're going to keep getting after. The porcelain berry in particular drops a seed in late summer, and that seed can germinate for many years. So the work's ongoing, and we'll continue to have to control these invasives and try to maintain the sites that we're planting on. But we're definitely making progress, and it's nice to see some of these sites able to breathe again, and people appreciating the work we're doing. We'll limit the herbicide use, but it is a necessary evil to control a lot of these more aggressive invasives. So we try to stick to mechanical methods, but we will use limited chemical methods as well. Next slide, please. So what we're putting in, we have 750 native trees and shrubs. Like I mentioned, we have oaks and maples and all different types of species, some large, some small, some fast growing, some slow growing, some that love wet feet and some that like wet feet a little bit less. We have trees with berries, trees with flowers, so a really diverse array of trees that we're going to be planting. One of our more exciting projects is something called a multifunctional riparian forest buffer, which is a really neat and interesting project that we're working on. Essentially, it has the same ecological benefits that any tree would have in terms of stormwater retention and other ecological benefits, but all of the trees that are planted in this area produce some type of fruit or berry or nut that can have market value. For us, we're not as focused on that, but for larger farmers that may be thinking about transitioning to a riparian forest buffer, it's a method that they can use if they want to tap a sugar maple and sell that, or plant a pawpaw tree and sell the pawpaws, which is one of our native fruiting trees. So we'll plant a lot of species, your black cherries, your service berries, your sugar maples, your pawpaws, persimmon, and a lot of other interesting species. So that's a fun project that we're looking forward to. And you can see
wildlife thanks you too.
You can see some of the work that we've done down there in the pictures below. And like I said, we have volunteers of all ages and backgrounds. We do put tree tubes around the trees, and this is a high flood prone area. So we use a little bit more of an industrial method to stake our trees in so that they don't wash away. rather than just light rebar. We use additional stakes to kind of hold the trees in place there. And we haven't lost any yet. We have our fingers crossed. Next slide, please. Project maintenance, another necessary part of the process here. Less glamorous, but important nonetheless. In addition to the trees planting, after they've established, we'll put down a wetlands mix, as Josh alluded to, which will kind of hold the sites in place and reduce the invasive species coming back, and also reduce the maintenance required on the sites. But we'll do regular mowing and volunteer removal. Like I said, it's an ongoing project that we're going to continue to have to do. We have annual pruning events, and we'll do spot treatments to control some of the invasives. Next slide, please. Some of the benefits. This slide really stood out to me when I put it together. After a year, and for simplicity's sake, I just assumed that everything was going to be a red maple. It won't be 750 red maples, but it made the math a little bit easier for me. So after a year, you can see almost 16,000 gallons of stormwater runoff being absorbed by the trees, and it's reducing our carbon footprint and providing habitat for native species. At full maturity, the numbers really do grow, and you see it's intercepting 8.5 million gallons of stormwater runoff each year. It's conserving energy, it's reducing your carbon footprint, and hosting hundreds of native species. And this is just one project. We're going to continue to be doing this work. So it really shows off the benefits of the type of work we're doing as compared to some of the invasive species that are currently there. They play host to fewer native species. They have less stormwater benefits. So we're really excited about this project and some of the work that we're going to be doing. It's a lot of fun. Next slide, please. We do have some staff committed to these projects, but it's a volunteer heavy initiative. In 2021, we had over 1,000 hours of volunteer time. And as you can see, we do it in all 4 seasons. We have invasive removal. We have in the winter, maybe fixing some of our cages and pruning some of the branches back. So the work is ongoing. We'll mulch the trees, and we really couldn't do it without the great support team we have. We'll be releasing our spring projects coming up in the next month or so, which will include a lot of knotweed removal and a couple of tree plantings as well. So my contact information's there if anyone wants to reach out or get involved. We'd love to have you out to a project when the weather is maybe a little bit nicer and temperatures are a little bit warmer, but we're actually going to be out there later today at 1 o'clock doing some invasive removal. So the work must go on. And that's really all I had. So I can take any questions if anyone has them.
Perfect timing. Alan, I think you had one question. Other
I
post in chat as well. We were going to take a break next, but go ahead.
Yeah, Jesse, great talk. It's really good to see this kind of work going on. I live right around the Pensy Trail. I know that there's a lot of work going on there with invasives. Is that part of what you're doing also, or is that a different group?
So the Pensy Trail is a somewhat different project. We have been there as well, but since it's not directly adjacent to a waterway, it's not included in this grant. We've done the last couple of years. There's tree tender plantings, and as you may have seen, we did treat some of the knotweed that's along there. And since it's under a telephone wire, we probably won't do tree plantings, but we'll try to put shrubs and grasses in that area to reclaim some of the land along the trail.
Okay, thanks. Because there's also a boatload of bamboo back there too. I think some neighbors initially put it as kind of a block when,
especially closer to the YMCA.
I know they cut it, but you really have to almost treat it to get rid of it because that stuff is really persistent. Okay, thanks. That's great. Appreciate it. And thanks for talking. Great talk.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, thanks, Jesse, so much. And it's always a great partnership with all of you over there. There's no doubt about it. So virtual applause. So we're going to take a 15-minute break now, approximately. So we'll be back right around 10:30-ish. So I will see you then.
Excuse me, Jesse?
Yeah.
Yeah, hi, can I ask you a question or two?
Of course. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm working myself and a couple other people, Darby Creek Valley has a property in Fallcroft. And we have gotten some tree vitalized watershed grants, and we're doing some invasive removal and planting of natives and things like that. We're not as far along, I don't think, as you are. How do you have areas where you in the springtime get lesser celandine?
Yeah, and truly, there's no great method for.
Yeah, I was wondering, do you just let it do its thing? And
Exactly. Our thinking is that we'll let it do its thing for the next couple of years. And then once we put that grass mix in, we'll kind of monitor to see how the grass kind of takes over the area, if it will help control and take away some of that celandine. But yeah, I've seen people with hose and different forestry mowers try to get at it, but it just seems like it's too daunting for us. So we're gonna kind of
it's
plant the
tough
trees, and the vines and the knotweed are more of our problem.
How about Phragmites? Do you have Phragmites anywhere?
Yes, different location than one of our wetland areas, which not part of these grants, but separately we've dealt with Phragmites as well, which is similar to knotweed, really challenging one.
Yeah, and that's one where we are probably going to use some limited spraying. So
you have to.
Yeah.
You really do.
Yeah.
And it's the long-term benefit, short-term harm potentially, but the long-term benefits will, I think, in my opinion, give you more reward.
Yeah. Well, I'd love to come join and help you and kind of see what you're doing at some.
Yeah, and you the
In the
same.
spring.
I'd love to come out and see the site and help out if I have time.
Yeah, I'd love to do that.
And the weather's nicer.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Great, thank you.
Jesse, thank you for your presentation. I'm really pleased to learn that you're relying a lot on mechanical removal for the invasives and minimizing the use of herbicides. What do you use in the way
In
of
terms of herbicide, so there's two primary types that we use, and I'm not how familiar are you with the different brand names. Glyphosate is one of the, or a wetland approved glyphosate is good for the knotweed, and then triclopyr is another one that we use on honeysuckle and a couple of our other invasives, porcelainberry.
I was aware of the glyphosate, but there's a particular one for that's of minimal.
Yeah, there's a wetland approved version. It's Rodeo is the main brand. There are other different brands that we'll use. And we have a horticulturist on staff. He does a lot of our herbicide applications. So he's been doing it for a long time and knows a lot of the different mixes and brand names.
Great, thanks.
Great job, Jesse.
Thanks, Tim.
Yeah, great presentation, definitely. Yeah.
Well, I had another question. Is your data on stormwater uptake of trees, is that?
I put it together through Davy Tree. They have a mapping software. You can plug in the information. So like I said, I just assumed everything was a red maple, but when you map through iTree, which is a forestry service application, they'll actually show you the benefits of the trees you're planting and the species you're planting. We don't use that one as much. We use Urban Forest Cloud, which is a PHS program. But truthfully, I think iTree may be the better application of the two. We use Urban Forest Cloud because we have to for some of our programs.
Yeah, I have used some of the iTree in the past. Did you mention another one before iTree?
We use Urban Forest Cloud.
Urban
That's
Forest
the one we
Cloud.
primarily use.
Jesse,
Harry?
yeah, hi. Thank you for a great talk. This is really getting into the weeds, but what exactly method of eradication of Japanese knotweed are you using?
Yeah.
How are you
sure.
getting rid of it?
So in the spring of year one, we will, in the spring, I mean May or June, you're going to cut it back and not rip the roots out. It could release sediments in the soil, and it could cause more erosion. So we're just going to cut it back, basically. Leave the bottom foot, which it weakens it essentially. And then a month later, you do the same. So you've cut it back twice in the spring of year one. And then in August or September, we'll go in and treat that area with glyphosate, the herbicide I mentioned. So that's year one. And then you have to do the same thing in the second year. Essentially, in the late summer, knotweed starts to send the sugars and nutrients down into its roots, which is why it's the best time of year to attack it. There's two reasons to cut back in the spring. One, it makes the application a lot easier. You're using a lot less chemical if you're cutting it back because the plant's a lot smaller. And then the second thing is you're weakening the plant, basically. So
Right.
it's during its growing season, fighting to try to grow and using more of its energy to try to grow up to its full height.
Is it reasonable to try the method that I found to be successful in cutting back about a few inches from ground level, and then taking an artist's paintbrush, dipping it into concentrated glyphosate,
Mhm.
and just applying a tiny amount?
I
And
haven't.
that seems to be working really well.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, I've heard of, there is like an injection gun of some sort. Maybe it's just businesses trying to make some money, but basically you stick it into the knotweed and just spray a tiny bit on the inside of it rather than treating the plant as a whole. So you're just like sticking a needle into it basically and injecting it with the chemical. So you're probably using less that way as well. But we may try out your method. I like that idea to use a little bit less.
Yeah, it's fun to fasten a tiny artist paintbrush onto a dowel or just a stick, and then you can just stand up and apply a really small amount. It turns out to be a two-person job. One guy cuts and the other guy or gal
Oh, okay.
paints.
Yeah. Where do you do that?
I live just adjacent to the creek in Yaden, just right next to Mercy Fitzgerald Hospital, if you know where that is.
Okay, awesome. And you've been doing it for a couple of years now?
Right. I've only been doing that when the knotweed is creeping up toward the more developed part of the property. But in the past week or so, I've actually been digging out the roots, and those roots can be like, I can't imagine how much energy is stored in those roots. But I'm not doing that on a bank, on the creek bank, but on top of the bank where I won't get erosion going down. And actually, the roots are not so hard to dig out at this time of the year, and also they don't go very deep, and you can elevate them out with a shovel tip. They don't make much of a divot in the soil, so that's an advantage.
Yeah, that's time consuming, but also effective when you're dealing with a smaller scale, for sure.
And so much fun.
Yeah.
Early on, the sprouts are edible too.
Right. I
I
know.
didn't know that.
We do that.
Oh, Harry, this is Greg. Just so you know, I do gardening work, so I actually work with Japanese knotweed a lot. I find that just simply pruning it and not disturbing the soil is a bit better because, well, in some places near streams, the rhizome can be like not too deep, but sometimes you can get like 4 feet. Like they can be really, really deep. established. So I find that just even just taking a like pruning shears, just like someone said it, like just a couple inches above the where it comes out of the ground, or like the lowest node you can get to. Like you do that like over a season or two at the most, it usually the rhizome just it dies off. But some of the other things like the lesser celandine, I don't know what you can do with that. I think that that's just because they're little bulblets. There's not much you can do with that. I think the thing with lesser celandine is you have to hope that you can grow something that's going to outcompete it. But even trees, like they just live under trees. So, but yeah, the knotweed is manageable if you, and you don't necessarily need the the, uh, the pesticide, but it does take a little more time. So, oh, another one too, if it's in an isolated area, there's not too many plants around, or if it's low to the ground, like if you prune it, you could also use, very, very carefully, you could use a flame weeder to, at the highest setting with the knotweed, but you got to be very careful because you don't want to get other beneficial plants. It works great if it's in a driveway because knotweed will go through pavement and macadam. Yeah, I gotta get going, but I wanted to share that you can tell it's a passionate topic with everybody here, the Japanese knotweed. It grows everywhere, Darby Creek, Cobbs, yeah, every place.
Thank you, Erik.
I appreciate yeah, thanks, Jesse. It was a good, good topic. Thanks for presenting.
Thank you.
Okay, folks, we're gonna get started in just a moment. So, again, please, everybody put your mics on mute, except for our next speaker. And Erik will get started with as soon as Aurora and Jaclyn come back online.
Sounds good.
Hello from Mexico.
Let's just give one more minute till Jaclyn gets back. Okay, sticking to my time bandit ways, why don't we get started? I'm sure Jack will catch up really quick.
Oh, I'm here, Alan.
Oh, okay. So do you want to introduce or do you want to just continue?
Yep, we can continue. I'm good.
Okay, our next speaker is Erik Silldorff from Delaware Riverkeeper. And it's a real pleasure to have Erik talk. So Erik, I'll leave it to you.
All right, thanks a lot. And thanks everyone for the time to tell some interesting stories about these really fascinating creatures, American eel. Next slide. There is, of course, a lot to say, and unfortunately, it's not all good news about the American eel. It's a really fascinating animal, a fascinating fish, but this is a pattern of decline from the Schuylkill River watershed, and I'll talk a little bit more about that, and also about the fact that American eels are vastly underappreciated. This isn't just a interesting creature biologically, but it looks from some emerging data with some collaborators that it may play a particularly important role, even a keystone role. That's a very loaded term in the ecology world, and it might be an overstatement in some settings, but there is some evidence that the American eel could play a keystone role in these watersheds. But before I do that, Alan and others have asked me just to briefly mention a little bit about the Delaware Riverkeeper Network as an organization. So next slide. I've had a chance to interact with a number of people in the Darby Creek watershed, both in my role here at the Delaware Riverkeeper Network, and we have a lot of folks that work alongside you guys in various things. But a little bit about where we work and what we do. This is our big mission statement: is we are trying to champion the rights of our communities for a main stem Delaware River and also the tributary streams that are free flowing. Right, really big part of the whole story is that the Delaware River doesn't have real dams on its main stem, and so we have all the migratory fish, including American eels, which I'm going to talk about. So free flowing streams. Darby Creek's another one that, as I understand it, and I don't know the Darby Creek really well, I think the Darby Creek doesn't have any dams currently, so it's another one of our free flowing hallmarks. Healthy and abundant with a diversity of life. And so my background is as a stream ecologist. And so I get to work in various roles in the organization, but in particular, I get to work on some of my best days in the field and on this diversity of life side of things. Next slide. So the Delaware Riverkeeper Network in large part tries to speak for the river and in an uncompromising way. We are one of those organizations that tries to be very vociferous about the needs and the protections for the rivers and for the tributaries and for our communities and the quality of life. Uncompromising to the point where, even though there may be a middle ground that others are seeking, oftentimes we are not trying to navigate a middle ground, right? We are really trying to speak for the greatest benefits for the ecology in our communities that we can envision, and let other people try to find that middle ground and that compromise. So we are trying to advocate as strongly as we can. We have a number of programs, including Awareness to Action. We have monitoring programs, and some of you may have been involved with Faith Zerby and the monitoring that Faith has done in the Darby and in various places throughout. It's a big watershed, 13,000 square mile watershed from the Catskills and the Poconos all the way down to Lewis and Cape May, where the river meets the ocean. Stream restoration, some of the work that I do, advocacy, and then legal. So this is the thing that I think distinguishes us at times from some of the other environmental organizations, is that we have lawyers on staff and we have outside counsel at times. And there are times that we feel that the appropriate response is either to hold our governments accountable and say, look, you're not following your own laws and regulations, or to hold polluters accountable. And so we will use those legal means. Usually it's not our first response, but sometimes it's the appropriate response. Next slide. And then to just highlight, I could go on, forever to talk about the various issues that we are currently working on and have worked on. Just to mention some of them from, small scale issues, the Bishop Tube advocacy, a contaminated site that Pennsylvania DEP is just trying to kind of gloss over and let a developer put housing units, again, kind of like some of the contaminated sites that we heard from EPA earlier, volatile organic compounds putting residential housing that, could jeopardize the lives of those that live in those residential housing. It's a forested parcel. It really needs to be, first of all, cleaned up appropriately. And then second of all, it doesn't, it should not be converted to residential housing, either in its current status or forever, because it is a beautiful forested preserve. Forested lands are a really key part of what we try to fight for and advocate. Riparian buffer protection, on a broad scale, township, county, statewide, throughout the watershed. And then, working alongside groups like the protection of Don Guanello Woods in Marple Township. That was a really big victory. And we're really happy that all of the people working together trying to protect that nearly 200-acre site from development and to keep it forested. So that's a big part, is trying to protect areas that are clean. And that goes to the next thing, which are the various levels of anti-degradation programs. Category 1 streams in New Jersey, EV streams in Pennsylvania, along the main stem Delaware River, the Special Protection Waters Program. So trying to fight for the highest levels of Clean Water Act protection. They're not perfect, but we really think that every stream deserves those kind of anti-degradation protections that are in there, and so fighting for those. And then some of the really big picture issues. So the fact that the Delaware River Basin has banned fracking itself, and we are in the middle, and the comment period just closed at the Delaware River Basin Commission for trying to prevent any of the fracking wastes from elsewhere in Pennsylvania from coming into our watershed. So a full ban on fracking and all of its effects is something that we've been fighting for, but really a pretty big deal. And I used to work at the Delaware River Basin Commission when the fracking issue first came up and we were writing regulations. It is amazing to see not just the Delaware Riverkeeper network, but a really big coalition of folks saying that no, clean water is more important than tapping into natural gas under the ground and contaminating people's lives. The impacts to human health are severe. The impacts to our water quality are also severe. And so amazing that has been banned, but also fighting other fossil fuel projects like the Penn East pipeline that also, it looks like it might be canceled. We talked a little bit earlier about PFAS, so trying to get regulations, and the new drinking water standard has finally, after way too long, been proposed in Pennsylvania, but still not a surface water standard for PFAS. Looking for Clean Water Act compliance on the tidal Delaware River, including up into the Hines Refuge for dissolved oxygen and for recreation. But we still, 50 years after the Clean Water Act, don't have the same designated uses in Philadelphia and Camden and Lower Delaware County that people throughout the nation enjoy in terms of the standards for aquatic life and for recreation. And so trying to fight for that. Combined sewer overflows, it's amazing how much raw sewage, not just on wet days, but one of the things that we're finding as we delve deeper into this issue is that those sewer overflows sometimes just get stuck open, and unless somebody is going in and sniffing around, there's raw sewage just dumping out of those CSO outfalls, and nobody knows it's happening, right? Until somebody happens by and makes a phone call and says, hey, is anybody going to check this? And how long has that been going on? So CSO pollution is still a big problem. And then the thing that I get to work on as the restoration director at the Delaware Riverkeeper Network is this idea of ecological restoration. And so I get to talk about that. But certainly, as you guys all know, there are many issues in every one of our watersheds and throughout the Delaware Basin. So always important fights to battle. We wish we always had more resources to get involved in more fights and to do more. But we try to be strategic and pick things that maybe are being unaddressed or being inadequately addressed. There aren't enough resources already going into a particularly important fight, or where we think that we can make a difference in a particular battle. So anyway, a little bit about Delaware Riverkeeper Network, but again, I could talk forever about that, but let me specifically get back to eels. So next slide. And this this sad story. This is from the Limerick generating station on the Schuylkill River. So this is the nuclear power plant, the Exelon nuclear power plant up in Limerick. And they're required to monitor the fisheries resources and some water quality parameters. And so they started this, first year is 1981. It's a little bit hard to see these. The three different bars are the Schuylkill River for blue, Perkiomen Creek in red, and the East Branch Perkiomen in that green chartreuse kind of color. That's a great drink, by the way, if anybody's ever tried chartreuse. We were drinking some last night. The sad thing, this isn't the only data set. There are a number of people. Joe Perillo from Philadelphia Water Department has also noticed a similar pattern, is that eel populations in the Schuylkill River have collapsed over the last 40 to 50 years. And there are problems throughout this fish species range in the Western Atlantic, from Canada all the way down through North America, and then Central and Caribbean, and a little bit of South America. And that's a little bit of a problem. They've been a candidate for listing a couple of times, but we're in the heart of this species range. The Delaware River, again, because it doesn't have dams on the main stem, and this is a migratory fish, generally speaking, has been doing really well in the Delaware River. It has access all the way up to the Catskills. I've been snorkeling in ponds up in this Catskill Mountains at midnight. And the first thing you see when you drop into these ponds, that you're 400 miles from the Atlantic Ocean, is that there are eels wiggling everywhere. It's an amazing feat to see. And if anybody wants to go do that at midnight, I can point the way up in the Upper Beaverkill Watershed, an area where there literally are no dams all the way to the Atlantic Ocean. So the Delaware generally is doing well, but why is the Schuylkill standing out? Why is the Schuylkill doing so poorly? And so I'll come back to that towards the end of this presentation. But it's not just about the American eel. If the American eel is just another fish and it's replaced in terms of its ecological function by other fish species or other parts of the ecosystem, then perhaps it's not as problematic and it's just another story of decline. But we have some data to say that no, losing the American eel is particularly problematic for our streams. And it looks like it's particularly a big problem in the Schuylkill watershed. So next slide. Again, the American eel is a amazingly fascinating, maybe, excuse me, one of the most fascinating creatures that I know of. I have literally started to fall in love with these eels. My kids and I go out, snorkeling. We'll even, and then maybe I shouldn't be doing this, we'll actually bring, some food, and the eels will come out and actually feed. We don't do that often, but this is how much we've become enamored with this creature. It's a catadromous fish, so it's a migratory fish, but it has the opposite life history pattern compared to salmon and shad, where it spawns out in the ocean and then migrates back to shore, and then lives in our freshwater environments or brackish water along coastal marshes and things like that. So it's kind of reverse to our normal story of the things that we often know. So it's a catadromous rather than an anadromous fish. The larvae looks like this little leaf. Let's go to the next slide. And then it has different life stages. The American eel spawns out in the Sargasso Sea, and I think my next slide but let's stay on this slide. But the next slide shows that the American eel is not the only eel that goes and swims out there basically to the Bermuda Triangle to find its spawning grounds. They find each other out there, and nobody's ever witnessed spawning. And then these little leaf-like larvae called leptocephali just ride the wave. It's almost like Finding Nemo, where they just jump onto this major current, and then they know when to get off. And there's been a recent paper published with the European eel that says that they actually, like a lot of species, have some magnetic trackers, somewhere in their brain, and they can tell what the magnetic field is. And depending on how long they've been riding, they want the magnetic field to be a certain orientation before they jump off and find their location. So again, the Delaware River is right at the heart of this species range. It ranges up into northern Canada, a little bit into Greenland. A little bit of mixing up in Iceland, but generally speaking, the European eels and the American eels don't mix, even though they're spawned in the same area. And they get up into the Mississippi a little bit, although not really huge populations and not running way up the Mississippi in terms of high densities. We're in the area where eels are in the heart of their range, and we can have extraordinary densities and biomass of American eels in our systems. Next slide. And again, I could go on. These eels are amazing creatures, right? We could talk about how long they live, the differences between males and females, and there's emerging data on that. But this is just another slide to show how fascinating they are biologically, is that the two little overlapping kind of amoeba-like things are the expected or known distribution of the spawning for the American eel, Anguilla rostrata, and the European eel, Anguilla anguilla. So these are in the family Anguillidae. So our Anguilla, that's our fun name for them. In northern Spain, they can call them gulas, and they're pretty tasty, although they don't get enough gulas coming back into Europe anymore. But this is what's really amazing, is that the European eels and the American eels spawn in almost the identical location, again, Bermuda Triangle area, but yet they don't intermix, and they don't really interbreed. There's a little tiny bit of that in Iceland, but then they find their way back. So right, their biology is really amazing and fascinating on its own. And so this animal, this species, is just delightful in terms of thinking about what it's doing and how it's doing it. And people are putting trackers on some of these eels to figure out how do they even get to the Bermuda Triangle. And they do these funny things where they regulate their gonad development by changing temperatures. The same eel will swim at 1,000 feet depth down in the darkness, right, of cold water to slow its gonad development. And then the same day it'll pop up to the surface or near surface and swim along in that warm water for a little while. And then it'll dive back down to 1,000 feet depth again for part of its swimming behavior, right? So a truly amazing animal. And anybody who wants to learn more about it, they can email me. There's a couple of cool books that explore the biology of the whole family of anguillids. And I think more and more people are starting to appreciate how wonderful these animals are. So next slide. The work I'm going to talk about here is looking at the ecological interactions of these American eels. And this is not work that I can take credit for. In particular, I've put Rich Horowitz and Dave Lieb on that title slide, because the ideas for all of this work started with Dave and I kind of fighting over some beers as we were talking about things. Dave's a crayfish expert at the Pennsylvania Fish and Boat Commission and Western Pennsylvania Conservancy and the Pennsylvania Natural Heritage Program. And he literally is one of the great crayfish experts in our region and in the United States. He will still say that there's people that know crayfish better than him, but he's a great researcher. And we were fighting over some of the patterns that he was talking about. And then an old colleague, Dave, and I both had worked at the Academy of Natural Sciences early in our career. And then we reached out to Rich Horowitz, and we started talking to Rich, and it was like, wait a minute, we started putting our data together. And there are some amazing patterns that I'm going to show you. I mean, almost unbelievable patterns. Anybody who's, delved into the primary literature for science, they're probably not going to like some of the graphs I'm going to put up there, because it almost looks like we've cherry picked our data. And these data patterns are unbelievable. But this research also was funded by a number of groups: the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, NIFWIF, Pennsylvania Coldwater Heritage Program, our colleagues at that used to be a USGS lab in North Central Pennsylvania, Carrie Blakesley and Heather Galbraith. That lab has closed in a really stupid move by USGS. So unfortunately, the two of them don't work at USGS anymore. But they helped rear some of these eels to introduce into the Pickering Creek watershed. But then the folks at Green Valley Watershed Association, we worked very closely with them, thinking about different areas and places to work. The French and Pickering Creeks Conservation Trust was was really instrumental in looking at sites. Historic Yellow Springs is one of our sites. And then the folks at Maryland DNR and the Delaware Department of Fish and Wildlife helped with collecting eels. So a big collaboration with a lot of people. So first thing before I get started is a thank you to all of my collaborators. This is not just my ideas or my research, and none of this would be possible without them. So next slide, let's dive into this peculiar pattern that we started to see. So this is the thing that Dave Lieb and I started talking about is he was talking about invasive crayfish and documenting them throughout the state of Pennsylvania. And he started to talk in particular about the Schuylkill. There are places up in the Poconos and the Lehigh watershed where you find invasive crayfish, but not very many. And in particular on the main stem Delaware River, again, all the way up into the Catskills and the Poconos. If you're on the main stem Delaware River and you find a crawdad, which is what I grew up calling them, crawdads up there almost invariably, almost without exception, are going to be this native big river crawdad called Limosis. You'll find that up in Hancock in the cold water zones. You'll find that in the Delaware Water Gap. You'll find that all the way down into the tidal Delaware River. Like it's Limosis. It gets a little bit boring even, right? Yet there's a few places where there's invasive crayfish, but then we started to see this cluster in the Schuylkill watershed. And then I started to compare that to some of the data with eels. I'm like, well, Dave, is there a chance that these invasive crayfish are doing better in places without eels? And first, to be honest with you, Dave blew me. You don't know what you're talking about, Erik, blah, blah, blah. He totally ignored me. But then we started to compare the data with Rich Horowitz, and Rich literally stopped one time in the courtyard and twisted his beard a little bit and said, I've got data that might look at that. So let's look at the next slide. Before I go into that, a couple of different species. The rusty crayfish is a really big problem, right, in the Schuylkill River, but it's not just the rusty crayfish in Pickering Creek where we're working, it's the virile crayfish. And this is what it looks like. The invasive crayfish, when you find them, they're not in the kind of the normal densities that you would see for a native crayfish. Their abundance can be 10-fold, even 100-fold higher than a native crayfish population. And so it's problematic when you have these invasive crayfish because they not only just displace the natives, but they start to dominate the food web. They can actually be somewhat of a dead end because as they get bigger, particularly some of these large invasive crayfish, a lot of things can't eat them. And so this is what a stream looks like that's been invaded. Maybe you have some natives, but sometimes it even looks worse than this. The only thing that you have are invasive crayfish, and you can get buckets full and go out and collect them and eat them. So that's one thing that I think they do in some of these watersheds. So next slide. The pattern that we started to see, and then let me go to next slide one more time, is that when we had eels present in a watershed, we almost, without exception, couldn't find any invasive crayfish. This is the graph that is almost unbelievable. I mean, it literally is almost like you flip a light switch. There's a couple places where there's low densities of eels, but as soon as you get into even very modest density, like 1 eel per 100 square meters of electrofishing, this is from Rich Horowitz's data, you can't find any of these invasive crayfish. And so we started to say, well, wait a minute, like, is this actually what's happening? Is that when you lose American eels, that pattern from Normando and the sampling at Limerick, when you lose American eels, this is the opening that allows invasive crayfish to start to take over. And so an interesting question. We have good correlational data. We've submitted this as a manuscript. We got kind of beat up in the peer review. So we've got to resubmit our manuscript on this. But we thought, well, let's use this as a restoration possibility. Instead of just testing this with correlation, which is what we have right now, let's look at causation. Let's do an experiment where we bring eels back into a watershed where there's invasive crayfish and see if we can reverse this trend. Can we actually, by getting eel numbers of 2 to 5 or 10 per square meter in a stream, can we actually reverse this trend, get control of the invasive crayfish, and start to bring native crayfish back? So next slide. Again, this is just a kind of a summary of what I was saying. There's in the Delaware Basin, based on, again, the data, the crayfish data mostly come from Dave Lieb, although Rich Horowitz and his group at the Academy of Natural Sciences had some crayfish data as well. And then Rich had all of the eel data through electrofishing primarily, this big, strong negative correlation with multiple species of invasive crayfish. And this need for experimental work. And one thing I need to say is that we're not the only people who have started to see this pattern. There's a woman up in the Hudson River, Sarah Munch, who now works for New York State DEC, who started to see this pattern when she was an undergraduate. There's a fellow out at the Susquehanna River Basin Commission who is testing this idea also. They're trying to bring eels back above some of their big hydropower plants in the Susquehanna as part of like restoring migratory fish. And he's also testing this idea about controlling invasive crayfish, because basically everywhere you go in the Susquehanna River Basin, for over 100 years, there have been no migratory fish, no shad, no eels, collapse of things like native freshwater mussels because of that. But almost everywhere you go in the Susquehanna River Basin, you just see invasive crayfish and you don't see the native like limosis anymore. So, and then there were European studies looking at this. Next slide. So we thought that the Pickering Creek watershed, which is again just a little up the Schuylkill from Valley Creek, it's situated between Valley Creek and Valley Forge National Historic Park, and then French Creek is the next watershed up on the western side of the Schuylkill, would be particularly good. We thought about which site we wanted to tinker around with here. And Pickering Creek was particularly good because it had a big dam on it, a big Aqua Pennsylvania water supply dam on it. So we had kind of controlled setting. We have a virile crayfish in the Pickering Creek watershed. There are rusty crayfish down in the main stem Schuylkill, but the rusties have not yet surmounted that dam barrier. But then next slide, we had a unique situation, and this is actually true for folks in the Darby Creek also. So this might be valuable for people to be thinking about, is that we have two native species of crayfish that are still persisting, despite the fact that invasive crayfish have mostly taken over. We have sites in the Pickering Creek watershed where we haven't seen a native crayfish for 10 years, but we still have two native crayfish. And in particular, what's great about the Pickering is that one of those species is actually a species that is new to science. It's an undescribed species that was first found in Valley Creek, that's been mostly eliminated from Valley Creek because the rusty crayfish arriving in Valley Creek. It's part of a species complex called the Acuminatus complex, and Dave Lieb is working with a bunch of people, particularly folks down in North Carolina, to describe this new species. It looks like there are 3 new species in this Acuminatus complex, so they're actually having to tease them apart and do the genetic analyses and try to figure out, how close is too close and what constitutes a species. So we still don't have a name for it, but we thought that the Pickering Creek watershed, among a number of other reasons, was good. There haven't been eels there in at least 40 or 50 years. There's some accounts from the 1970s of a couple of eels, but we had a conservation opportunity here by introducing eels, by testing this idea that invasive crayfish are vulnerable to eel predation and uniquely vulnerable to that predation, right? This is a common story in ecology that when you have a predator-prey relationship, you evolve behavioral patterns or habitat patterns so that you can coexist with that predator. But when you don't evolve with that predator, like islands out in the Pacific, and you introduce a new predator like rats or snakes or pigs, then you can eliminate these naive species. And so the idea is that these invasive crayfish don't do very well with American eels, whereas the native crayfish can coexist with them. So by bringing eels back to the Pickering Creek watershed, we thought there might be an opportunity to reverse that trend, and as important as anything, maybe stop the decline in this new species, basically prevent it from going extinct before it's even described, and we have a name for it. That native crayfish is known from 5 watersheds in our region. It's known from Pickering Creek, from Valley Creek, from Crum Creek, from a branch of the Brandywine that extends out towards Valley Creek. And then for you guys, it's actually present in the upper part of Darby Creek as well. So kudos to folks working in the Darby Creek. The lack of dams, good eel populations is probably part of the reason why we still see this new species there. So next slide. The experiment that we decided to run here in the Pickering Creek is really simple. It's to collect a bunch of data before we bring eels back introduce eels, as many as we can, and we've actually probably one of the spoiler, we probably have to introduce more eels. Introduce as many eels as we can, and then follow the trajectory of the crayfish and the fish populations. Again, this idea that eels might be a keystone species, so it might not all be just about the eel crayfish interaction, but it might be about the entire food web and the impacts of these invasive crayfish on the entire food web. And so to look at what happens. And so in 2019, we said, let's try to bring as many eels back to the Pickering Creek watershed. Let's first sample as much as we can before we bring those eels back. And so we have quantitative data for fish and crayfish at 5 sites. We introduced over 4,000 eels to the Pickering Creek watershed, but these were in 2 different size classes. We introduced by kind of trap and transport from streams like Ridley Creek, like the Pennypack Creek and the Frankfurt Creek in Philadelphia city limits. Moderate sized eels, like 5 inches, 10 inches, 15-inch, 20-inch eels. So eels that are resident in freshwater environments. We said we're going to trap them, we're going to transport them to Pickering Creek and release them there. So that was about 700 eels. And then the bulk of the eels were the long-term investment. These eels can live 10, 20, even 25 years in a watershed before they decide to migrate back out to the Sargasso Sea. And so we knew we probably couldn't get enough trap and transport eels. And so we worked with the state of Delaware and the state of Maryland to catch these baby eels as they are washing up into our shores as one of the stages called a glass eel, where they're 100% transparent other than their eye and their gut. And they collect thousands of eels like this in a given night on a really cold winter's night like we had last night, January and February. And so we reared those eels, and this is the collaboration with the USGS lab. They reared them up for about 6 months, tried to bolster their body size, and then we released about 3,600 of these young eels into the Pickering Creek watershed, with the idea being that those eels will hopefully survive for the next 10 or 20 years as we try to figure out the long-term picture with the decline with eels in the Schuylkill watershed and try to get natural migration back to Pickering Creek and other areas in the Schuylkill Creek, into the Schuylkill River watershed. And then we also did monitor one outside location, Crum Creek. It also has the same invasive crayfish, the viral crayfish, and it also has relic populations of that new crayfish, the Acuminatus species. So we thought Pickering would be a great site. This is what we did. And then I think the next slide is probably starting to show some data or showing some results. Oh, no, maps, sorry. So give folks some orientation. And again, I don't have a pointer here, so I'll try to walk through it. The watershed runs from the west to the east towards the Schuylkill River. So you'll see that on the right side there, the Schuylkill River just kind of snaking along the edge. There's the big reservoir, Pickering Water Reservoir, which is a water supply reservoir for aqua. Yep, right there. Thank you for that cursor, which is both good and bad. It's good, it makes it a good experimental setting. It's bad because it also prevents some of the migration. Although one thing that is noteworthy and might be worth talking about is that eels can migrate downstream over dams pretty well. Eels, again, part of their unique funky behavior. On a wet night, you can actually find eels swimming across like a wet pasture. If there's a pond out there, particularly female eels, they want to be kind of the queen of their own domain. And so you will actually can find eels swimming across land if they sense that there maybe is a water source out there. And you might find just a single big fat female eel in like an old farm pond that is disconnected from any stream network or anything like that. Eels are really amazing creatures. And so they can go downstream over dams as long as there's not big hydropower turbines. And even if there are hydropower turbines, again, a recent study, a lot of emerging data, if you turn those turbines off during their fall migration, they can even get around some of these big hydropower dams and can out migrate. So we're not worried about the dam in terms of out migration. It certainly prevents the in migration, but the Schuylkill doesn't have enough eels anyway right now, so we have to overcome that. So we have the green dots are locations where we do fish and crayfish sampling, and then this black dot lower down in the watershed is where we only did crayfish sampling. It's a really small little unnamed tributary that we call Great Valley Trib. And then next slide. We introduced eels just in the upper parts of the watershed. We knew we weren't necessarily going to be able to flood this watershed with enough eels to get back to a natural density. And so in particular at those two green dots, the one on the kind of the upper one, we call Yellow Springs, the Yellow Springs tributary, which is at historic Yellow Springs, a wonderful venue. And the folks there have been just tremendous working with us. And then the lower green dot with the arrow is Pine Creek Park. So our Pine Creek site and our Yellow Spring sites. And then we also, thinking about the fact that eels can be cannibals, we said, why don't we release some of those baby eels a little bit downstream where we're not releasing the big eels so that they have a little bit of a fighting chance. But basically everything likes to eat eels. They're nocturnal organisms, and part of that reason they're nocturnal is because everything likes to eat them. And so we were worried about mortality of these baby eels and acknowledged the fact that all 3,000 or 4,000 of these eels probably weren't going to survive even their first year necessarily. But this is our orientation for where we were sampling and the data that I'm going to show you in the next slide. So next slide. Oh, and I think next slide is timeline and summary. Again, released in 2019, intensive monitoring before we released the eels in August, September, and October. 2020 is our first monitoring year afterwards. And then 2021, we did some monitoring, but both 2020 and 2021, of course, messed up by COVID, made things challenging to get big groups of sampling teams together. We did do some monitoring, and then 2021 got even further messed up. We were supposed to sample right at about the time that Hurricane Ida came sweeping through. And I'll talk a little bit about the effects of that. So we are looking to monitor for additional few years and maybe, maybe really long term for maybe another 10 or 20 years looking at Pickering Creek Watershed as this experimental setup. Next slide.
Erik, this is Alan. Just real quick, just a reminder that you're done, that your talk goes to 11:15. So
all
I
right.
think it looks like you have like 14 more slides. So
yes, so I can go pretty quick through that. So
yeah,
this is just
sorry to interrupt.
Nope, that's good. This is just us releasing some eels, the first eels that have seen Pickering Creek in at least 40 or 50 years. Pretty exciting. Next slide. Another photo, releasing some of the larger eels, again, using, these are bigger animals. And then next slide, again, reminding people of how small these little eels can be after being reared even for 6 months. So next slide. The summary is that there were no eels when we did intensive monitoring in 2019, but when 2020, after we released them, we did get to those moderate densities. We did get to about 3 eels per 100 square meters at our release site. So we were up in those densities that we have seen able to control eels. But that in terms of crayfish response, we didn't see an immediate response 1 year after sampling. And then in 2021, we got blown out by the hurricanes so that crayfish were really hard to find. So the 2021 data, I'm not even going to present those, are messed up, declines by like 90% or more in crayfish densities from all the flooding. So next series of slides really quickly. At our sites, I'm going to talk about the Yellow Springs site. I'm going to talk about the Pine Creek site where we released eels. And then I'll probably gloss over a couple of the other sites because those are the two main ones where we released eels. So next slide. So at Pine Creek Park, we have the 2 native species as the first 2 bars. The blue is the 2019 data and the orangish color is 2020 data. Bartonii is this common species throughout Pennsylvania. It likes cold water, headwater streams. And so we're not seeing a lot of it in some of our warm water sites. The new species is the middle set of bars, Acuminatus, and then the invasive is the one on the right, the virile crayfish, Faxinias virilis. And what we saw basically is not a big change, but for us, that's actually good news that the native species have been able to persist at similar densities, maybe perhaps because eels are around to pick off some of these invasive crayfish. So that's Pine Creek Park site. The next site is Yellow Springs. Yellow Springs, similarly, not quite as many of the new species, the Acuminatus, but similar densities, first year and second year. Virile crayfish are again similar densities, but have not totally overwhelmed them. And then the final graph that I'll show is the next slide, which is, this is the main stem Pickering Creek. And what we see is that native crayfish haven't been found in the main stem Pickering Creek for at least 10 years. And here we get 100% virile crayfish, the high densities of the virile crayfish. And this is what we were afraid of at those other sites. So this is how bad it could be. This is the thing that Dave Lieb has monitored over the last 10 to 12 years, is that site after site has flipped to this, where all you have left is virile crayfish. So at the very least, what we've seen in 1 year after releasing eels is that the native crayfish have not gone extinct, and in particular, this new species of crayfish has not been wiped out entirely. But we haven't seen big declines in the virile crayfish yet, which speaks to the possibility of maybe needing higher densities of eels. Right? There's kind of two questions. Do Native American eels prevent the invasion of a novel invasive species like the virile crayfish? But it's a separate thing that once they're established and once they have high density, can you knock them back? And so you might actually need even higher densities to knock them back once they are present, talking kind of similarly about like Japanese knotweed, right? Like when it's early in the invasion, it's easier to control than when you have an acre patch and then have to knock that back. So that's one of the things that we're seeing. And then we'll skip the next slide and go to the 2 slides later, one more slide. This is the big problem, is that American eels aren't getting into the Schuylkill River watershed, that these declines are seen both in these consulting data and then in the next slide, Fish and Boat Commission data. Every 10 years since the 1970s, they've seen like a 10 to 20% decline in places where they can even catch one eel in the Schuylkill watershed. So this is really an alarming trend in places. And then finally, for the next slide, places like the Schuylkill River where we are actually removing dams. So the X's on this are places where the Plymouth Dam has been removed, the Vincent Dam has been removed, the Felix Dam has been removed, Kernsville Dam is being studied for removal, but even with those dam removals, American eels are not able to get over their dams. There might be some modifications to the Fairmount Waterworks Dam that have changed the way that eels get over that, but over the last 50 years, our eels have been lost. And that loss isn't just important in terms of conserving American eels, but it looks like the American eels is a key part of the story with invasive crayfish, preventing the invasion of these crayfish from getting into watersheds, and perhaps in preserving native species, even species that haven't been described. So one of the things that we want to work on is how do we get more eels into the Schuylkill watershed, working with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, with the City of Philadelphia Water Department, particularly at Fairmount Dam. We think we need to get more eels up into the Schuylkill watershed and up over these dams, and acknowledging the fact that perhaps dams like the Fairmount Waterworks, we can't get rid of. We'd love to get rid of all dams. We can't do that probably. But anyway, so I think I haven't left very much time for questions. So I will monitor the chat. I don't know if people want to do a couple of quick questions. I will monitor the chat and answer some questions there, but also feel free to reach out to me if you want to hear any more about any aspect of this. It's a fascinating story. These American eels are amazing. Crayfish are really important in these stream ecosystems, and this is still developing as we learn more.
Well, I think we have time for one question, so I might as well ask that question.
That's the prerogative you have.
I got you as a speaker. I'm going to ask the question.
Good, Alan.
So how about stream morphology, impacts on stream degradation, sedimentation, impact on the habitat? How is that being considered in your study versus the impact on just the crayfish?
So eels are one of the most adaptable organisms. Again, they are fascinating. Some of our highest densities of eels that we find are in almost pristine native streams, like in the Delaware Water Gap National Recreation Area, but also in some of our most urbanized and impacted streams. We again collected eels from Frankfort Creek. I don't know if people know the Juniata neighborhood of Philadelphia, right, the Frankfort Creek, that's actually one of the Academy of Natural Sciences and Paul Overbeck, if people know Paul Overbeck, that's one of his go-to sites anytime he needs eels, is he goes to Tacony Creek Park, to the Juniata Golf Club, and eels are thick there, even though that's impacted by CSO overflows, even though that, that stream can go from, 10 CFS to 1,000 to 5,000 CFS in a matter of a couple of hours, because it's 100% impervious coverage almost in the watershed, and that's not just regular stormwater, but that's combined sewage. So even in places with crazy habitat, American eels do really well. So we don't think that habitat is an important covariate in this pattern. We think eels can do well in all of those habitats. The crayfish certainly have different preferences for habitats, but we see that same pattern of crayfish invasions in the absence of decent populations of American eels across both, well-preserved habitat and well-preserved streams, things that score well on an IBI, as well as streams that are totally washed out.
Thanks, Erik. There are lots of questions on the chat. So if you have some time to take a look at that and respond, that'd be great.
I would love to. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for your time, everybody. And again, feel free to reach out. I'll talk everybody's ear off, of course, about eels anytime. So thank you.
Okay, so Jaclyn's having some connectivity issues. I'm not sure if Jaclyn's on. So our next three speakers, I'm really excited about this. I'm excited about all of our speakers, but especially the next three, because this year we wanted to reach out to see what some of the high schools are doing in the areas in our watershed, because really these folks are our future. These are the folks that are really going to really drive our systems into the future. So really excited to hear about what they're doing. And the first one is Clara Stieg from Conestoga High School, talking about the school sustainability resolution. And Aurora, are you able to? Okay. So Clara, take it away.
Just wanted to say Clara couldn't be here, so Maya and I are filling in for her, but we're happy to be here.
Okay, so Ben, do you want to introduce yourself and Maya, please, or what each?
Yeah, Maya, do you want to go first?
Yeah, so my name is Maya and I'm a sophomore at Conestoga High School. So our presentation today is sort of about how we've been working with, I've been working with Ben and also Clara and a couple other people at our school who unfortunately, like we said, couldn't be here. And we've been sort of moving our school district to different East Town to renewable energy. And so our group is called TE2R, and we're excited to be here today and tell you guys a little bit about our process in writing a resolution and getting it passed with the school board. So if you go to the next slide. So I want to talk a little bit about why schools matter and why specifically we're trying to target our school district in the fight for renewable energy. So just some general stats. Schools actually make up about 8% of energy usage in commercial buildings, and their energy usage is equivalent to 43% of the country's office spaces, just to sort of put in perspective how much schools matter in the fight for energy. And budget-wise, schools spend $8 million a year roughly on energy, which are schools' second largest expense, second to only school personnel. So schools also, just fun fact, emit as much carbon dioxide as 18 coal-fired power plants. And so our goal here was to sort of cater more to young people, because we're going to be who's particularly vulnerable to the negative effects of pollution and climate impacts in general. So what can schools sort of do to help out here? So I think for us, it was sort of setting up schools as leaders on climate action and showing that we can effectively teach students what's good and what our good leaders look like in fighting climate change, and sort of just building student activity and student interest, because these things are going to be affecting students. So it's really nice to have the action be driven by students. And with this action, schools can actually entirely offset climate impacts and their energy use through a combination of energy efficient measures, which can reduce carbon emissions by up to 30%, as well as just clean energy in general. So what sort of happens when schools switch to renewable energy? So a couple things. First, improved air quality. And through this, we sort of also improve academic performance because we have better ventilation, temperature control, lighting, and noise management, which helps promote a better learning environment for students in general. And on top of this, like sustainable design elements like passive solar design or green roofs can be a teaching opportunity for students to like see this technology hands-on and be able to do project-based environmental things and learn directly from real-life examples. So overall, we sort of save money on energy just by implementing energy efficient measures. We can reduce our energy spending by 25%. And the cost of renewable energy is constantly falling as stuff like solar panels becomes more common. For example, right now, solar panels are a third of what they used to cost 10 years ago. And so overall, we've sort of been able to enhance our community resilience, and just schools in general can provide educational opportunities by sort of moving their school district to renewable energy. And so I'll pass it off to Ben to sort of talk about what our school district specifically did and how like we worked with the school board to sort of really fight what we wanted.
Yeah, thank you, Maya. Like Maya, I'm also a sophomore at Conestoga. But if we go to the next slide, we can just tell you. So from the beginning, as Maya was sort of explaining, we did a lot of time researching and just learning about what other student groups in our area had been doing. We really looked at Radnor as our main source of inspiration. This picture is some of Radnor's solar panels, and we were just really impressed by what Radnor students were able to accomplish through their school board. And once we sort of talked to those students and they taught us what they did, we obtained what was at the time current, but what is now the outdated Terrific Easttown energy bill. And we sort of analyzed those bills to get a basic understanding of the source of our school's energy. We then got in contact with the Tredyffrin Environmental Advisory Council and the Clean Energy Task Force. And we looked into Tredyffrin's similar clean energy resolutions for the township. We presented our ideas and what we wanted to do with our school board to the Easttown Environmental Advisory Council. And we received endorsements from both the Tredyffrin and the Easttown Environmental Advisory Councils. And from there, we really just began drafting our resolution and deciding how we wanted to go about like really what we wanted to say to the school board. And we used some of the Sierra Club's resources, like their handbooks and guides, to draft our resolution and plan how we were going to present to the school board. And then it really came time for us to start our own initiative. And if we go to the next slide, we sort of made our own website and amassed community support for our resolution. We had a party in the park, which was held at Wilson Farm Park, where we really just had students and parents and community members get involved in our resolution and tell them what we were planning on doing, and just getting them getting community support for what we were trying to do with our school board. And once we sort of had these group of community members on our side, we were able to get in contact with our school board members and get feedback on our resolution before we officially presented it to them. We tweaked our resolution a little bit and then presented it to the school board at the September Facilities Committee meeting. The committee passed it, and then in November, we presented to the school board at large, and they passed our resolution 9-0, which was a huge win. Our link, I think Maya can put our link to our resolution in the chat if you just want to sort of see what we asked the school board to do. But our biggest thing now is really just holding our school board accountable. And obviously we got our resolution passed, but the school board has to actually make those actionable steps to continue to work towards moving to renewable energy by 2040, which was our goal year. So now that we have this community support, our goal is what I was just saying, to make sure school board follows through, but also spreading our initiative to other schools in sort of the Southeast Pennsylvania region. So our ask is that if you know any other students, if you have neighbors or kids or just relatives that go to school sort of in this area, that you think that they might have student groups that want to do something similar with their school board, or have the possibility to move their schools to more like a use of renewable energy, our ask is that you would just reach out to them and see if they would want to start something up, and we can get in contact with them. And we would be more than happy to sort of just talk to other students and get other schools to switch to renewable energy. Maya just put our email in the chat. It's sunriseberwin@gmail.com. We're a part of the Sunrise movement, but I guess that was our main presentation here, and just sort of talking about how we got our school board to move towards renewable energy and how we can make other school districts in the area do it too. So yeah, thank you.
That sounds great, guys. Thank you. Question, is there a network of environmental clubs or groups within that you guys are connected to, or is there anything like that along, I don't know, the Southeast or anywhere in the country where you guys talk and chat with each other?
Yeah, so our Tredyffrin Easttown to Renewables group, the main people in the group that were working on our resolution are all part of the Sunrise movement. We have a branch that it's Sunrise Berwin, so it's mostly high schoolers, but we're not technically affiliated with our school. as I was saying, we were talking to like the two different Environmental Advisory Council and the Easttown Council, but we just had a bunch of different groups that weren't directly related to each other that we were able to talk to and learn from. And after talking with Radnor, it was really just getting in contact with like these random groups here or there, nothing concrete that all brought us together, but just meeting like one-on-one with these different groups, we were able to go forward with our goals.
Yeah, that might be interesting to see if there's a way to organize, or at least to set up, maybe Zoom meetings with different environmental clubs or groups in the Watershed, or even expand out, or start small, say the Watershed, and move out from there. Because you mentioned Radnor in your presentation, and we have someone from Radnor High School coming and talking, not the next one, but the one after that. So there's a real potential here for you guys to really do some really important stuff, even beyond the important things you're doing now within your own school district.
Thank you.
Other questions? Well, go ahead, George.
When I was at William Penn, we organized through my environmental club energy use surveys and got the district to sign on for some assistance from the state to become more energy efficient. And so environmental clubs can make an impact, especially in their own district. And so if you compound that by joining with other schools, it can be powerful.
Yep, agreed. Well, so Ben and Maya, there are a couple things in the chat. So if you guys have a chance to go through it, Maya, I saw that you would respond, but if you guys want to take a look, you've got some very proud alumni in that chat also of what the work you're doing. So why don't we move on? Rhoads' next speaker. Jaclyn, if you're still having connectivity troubles, I can continue it, or I see you're on. However you want to do it.
So hi everyone. I just want to thank the DCVA for having us today. I really appreciate that. So Liz and I will be talking today in behalf of Haverford High School. Audrey and Chloe unfortunately couldn't make it, but yeah, so you can move on to the next slide, please.
Okay, so hi everyone, I'm Liz. So the mission statement of our club is that we seek to empower our high school community with information, tools, and resources we need to create change within ourselves, our local community, and our global community. We hope to work toward mitigating both the causes and effects of climate change, as well as foster within us a passion for our planet and the drive to do our part to save it. Go to the next slide. So these are our club goals for this year. We meet about once a month, and we usually try to have a topic for each meeting. So in the past, we've talked about waste reduction. Part of that was food waste, fast fashion, energy consumption, the Green New Deal, and most recently, we talked about our watershed. And with each meeting, we try to have a corresponding activity. So when we did discuss, this was last year, fast fashion, we had a thrift flip, where we encourage students to go out, or if they had something at home that they had thrifted, we kind of had a fashion show competition type thing. When we talked about waste reduction, we teamed up with 2 students at our school who were making plarn mats, which are mats made out of plastic yarn, which come from plastic bags. So they were repurposing those and donating them to, I think, a women's shelter. So we teamed up with those 2 students to teach the club how to make plarn. And then, like I mentioned, we talked about the watershed. And then this past Monday, we did a creek cleanup at Mary Place. So some of the other goals for this year are that we hope to bring back some old projects as well as start new ones. Before we were part of Environmental Club, the club used to do a denim drive. So we're hoping to bring that back. And we're also hoping to start a new initiative about idling cars in the morning. So we're looking more into doing that later this year. You can go to the next slide. All right, so I already talked about some of our past projects like the denim drive, but around holiday time a couple years ago, we did a low waste bake sale. We did it, and that was to raise money. I forget which organization, but I think it was for the Watershed. We did a thrift flip, creek cleanup, flarn making. We did brown bag wrapping paper around the holidays where we had everyone come and repurpose brown grocery bags for that. And then Josh will talk about this a little bit later, but we also teamed up and did a rain garden build. So in the future, like I mentioned, we're hoping to do a denim drive and thrift flip. We also hope to collaborate with more clubs at our school. That was something that we tried to do last year a little bit with the great talking about the Green New Deal. And also we teamed up with our fashion club to do the thrift flip. And then we just hope to get more of the school involved in kind of what we're doing by doing public awareness campaigns. So you can go to the next slide. So this was, you'll see some more pictures of what we've done in the past, but this was from holiday time when we did the brown bag wrapping paper. So yeah, and they're on our Instagram if anyone wants to check it out. We try to post pictures of what we do as a club. So yeah, you can go to the next slide.
So I just want to discuss for a little bit my role as a liaison between Haverford Township's Environmental Advisory Committee and our school's environmental club. So what I do is I attend the EAC's monthly board meetings, and I try to communicate information on each group's initiatives and projects to each other so that hopefully we can work on more collaborations in the future. And some of the past projects that we've collabed on, as Liz mentioned earlier, we did a rain garden, which I'm going to discuss in a few slides more in detail. We volunteered with the Soul Rise Delco program, where we solicited door to door with these little orange cards to houses in Havertown, and we were convincing them to install solar panels. We also, me and a friend worked as waste diverters at Haverford Township Day, showing people what things are supposed to be properly recycled versus in the trash. And also some of the future projects that we are trying to work on are more rain gardens, a tree canopy project where we're comparing pictures of trees in Havertown from 20 years ago to now and seeing the impact that climate change has on these trees, and also electric vehicle test drives to convince people to buy EVs. So you can go to the next slide. So this was a creek cleanup that our environmental club had around a week ago at Mary Place at the Darby Creek Watershed. And there was a surprising amount of trash there. I mean, I was surprised at least. And I'm sure, many of these parks around these areas have lots of trash that needs picking up. You'd be surprised by how much there is that, goes all the way deep into the woods and around the creek as well. And you can go to our final slide. So this is our EAC and Environmental Club Rain Garden collaboration. So this was, I believe, in the summer of last year. This is someone's house who goes to Haverford High School. It's like right across from the school, which is really cool. So any students walking by will see that rain garden slide on the picture to the left on, what a rain garden is, and they can see the progress that we made. And these are some pictures of us working on it. And there's also a YouTube link to a quick time-lapse video. It's around a minute long. If you could click on that, please. Yeah, just the red link at the bottom, yep.
Sorry, I have like a menu here that's blocking me from, let me see if I can escape out.
No problem, yeah.
I actually can't see it. I'm sorry. Maybe you can drop it in the chat. I have a menu that won't go away.
Yeah, sure. I can drop the link in the
chat. Here we
chat.
go. You know what? I was able to move it.
Okay.
There we go.
are you playing the video right now? I'm not sure.
Yes, I'm seeing it. Are you not seeing it?
Oh.
Yeah, no, we're not. Aurora,
Oh,
I was going to show the video later.
Okay.
So it's awesome. But when I was going to do a little 5-minute on the rain garden program later on, so I'll be sure to show it then.
okay. Sorry about that. I'm not sure. I clicked on it. It popped up on my screen. I just assumed it was showing you all.
Yeah, you have to reshare when you click on a new video. Sorry, I posted it in the chat.
Okay.
So, Peter, you're going to show it later?
It sounds
Yes,
like you will, yeah.
yes, I will.
Okay. Well, we look forward to seeing it. Any questions for the team?
Yeah, I have one since we have a little bit of time.
Sorry,
So-
Lisa too.
Oh, go ahead. I've been monopolizing.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Lisa.
I just wanted to say that kudos to all the students. I am so impressed by your work, you guys. You're doing an incredible job, and it is really heartening, I think, for us to see that our youth care so much and are so active and engaged. I'm from Radnor, and I know we have a very active group at Radnor as well, and it's just really thrilling, and kudos to all of you, and keep it up. Thank you so much for everything you're doing.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, I also what Lisa said, and Lisa, Radnor is coming up next. There is an update from, so they'll be talking next. So guys, you heard the previous talk from Conestoga, so hopefully you'll have an opportunity to maybe touch base with them, talk a little bit, and also Radnor folks. I mean, hopefully this is kind of the start of trying to maybe set up a network of some of the high school ecology or environmental clubs in the area, and maybe this time next year we can have you come back and kind of give another talk of an update, and maybe talk a little bit about maybe challenges and also experiences of interacting with other ecology clubs in the watershed. I think that would be a great opportunity.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, then hearing none, definitely a big round of virtual applause. It should be good now for everyone. Lots of great information, definitely inspiring to other people, even especially adults. All right, so last up, before we get to our DCVA Blast, we have the Radnor team, and it is all very exciting information. So take it away.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kate Simonero. I am a junior at Radnor High School, and I am also co-president of Action Earth. I want to thank the Darby Creek Valley Association for giving me this opportunity to share some details about our club and to connect with some local environmental groups. It's been so inspiring hearing from Haverford and Conestoga, and I'm really excited to connect with you guys. The Darby Creek Valley Association has been very supportive of our club, and we have attended many of their volunteer events the past few years. So again, thank you for having me. Next slide, please. Thank you. So today I plan to start off by giving a brief overview of Action Earth. Then I will talk about how Action Earth led the passage of Ready for 100 to the school board back in 2020. Next, I will share some things we've done so far this year. And finally, I will share how we plan to move forward as a club. Next slide, please. Thank you. So Action Earth is the environmental club at Radnor High School. It was founded in 2018 by the amazing Allie Bauer and Becca Zajac when they were just freshmen in high school. They are very motivated individuals, and now they are attending Tufts University and Dartmouth College, where Allie is now studying environmental science. In summer 2021, my co-leader Hannah and I took over from them. We are continuing on Action Earth at Radnor High School. So our goal as a club is to make the Radnor community more sustainable by educating the student body and faculty on the dangers of climate change. So we support Ready for 100% renewable energy in Pennsylvania as a way to combat climate change. And two of the constants that we keep doing throughout the years in our club is volunteering and fundraising. So we volunteer with local organizations like the Darby Creek Valley Association, of course, along with others like the Radnor Conservancy and Penn Environment. Those are two other great organizations. Fundraising is another thing our club focuses on. And by fundraising, the club can support any specific environmental cause they want, which gives us a lot of freedom to make choices. Next slide, please. So what is Ready for 100? Ready for 100 is a clean energy resolution calling for 100% renewable energy by the year 2050. With the leadership of Action Earth, this resolution was passed in 2020 regarding all school buildings in Radnor Township. So at the time, 4 out of 5 of the schools in Radnor were previously running on clean geothermal energy, but with the passage of the Climate Students Resolution, now all sectors of Radnor High School are planning to run on clean energy by 2050. And months went into the planning and preparation of Action Earth students' presentation to the school board. And amazingly, the school board unanimously passed the resolution back in 2020. Next slide, please. So now Ready for 100 is in the implementation stage in Radnor, and Action Earth is continuing to push the school board to follow through with the resolution by communicating our support for clean energy in Radnor. So we plan to accomplish this by getting a number of signed pledges, just like these ones I have right here. I think that by having tangible support from both students, teachers, community members, is a great way to show the township that we are ready for positive change. And we also plan to make a short video voicing our support for Ready for 100 from teachers and students and sending that to the township as well. Next slide, please. So there have been some positive changes in Radnor so far. Although the pandemic has slowed down the implementation stage a bit, Action Earth continues to work with the Radnor Township Green Team to spread the word about why clean energy in Radnor is so important. So far in 2022, we have already seen some very positive changes in Radnor. For example, a sustainability director named Melissa Kahn was hired for the Radnor Township, and this leadership will help further sustainability in Radnor and push towards clean energy. I also heard recently, excitingly enough, that Radnor plans to add 5 new charging stations for electric vehicles around the township, which is also very exciting and pushing people to convert to electric vehicles. Next slide, please. So now I will shift to sharing Action Earth's accomplishments in fall of 2021 and some of the things we have done in 2022. Next slide. So in fall of 2021, Action Earth was at the activities fair at the Radnor High School, where all clubs get the chance to recruit new members. So Action Earth was able to recruit over 60 new members, and in total, we now have 123 amazing members. And at the activities fair, we also spread the word about Ready for 100 to the township, that the student, to show the students that they support new energy. And these are the pledge that we asked them to sign. And so yeah, we're just gonna keep getting support and communicating it to the township. And that's what we did at the activities fair. Next slide, please. Okay, so in the fall, Action Earth spent a lot of time outdoors volunteering with local organizations. And in September, we worked with the Radnor Conservancy to distribute trees to Radnor residents. And along with the Radnor Conservancy, we ended up distributing 500 native trees to Radnor residents. And of course, we worked with the Darby Creek Valley Association. And so we went to their tree planting event at the McCall Golf Club, which was such a rewarding experience because we were preventing stormwater runoff, which not only were we planting trees, which in itself is amazing, but to prevent stormwater runoff was great for the students. And we also went to the annual invasive plant removal at Sacred Heart Academy, which was a lot of fun because we got to see students that we see each year because we go each year. And yeah, next slide. So something really cool we got to do in the beginning of the year was speak with State Representative Greg Vitale. So he represents the 166th district of Pennsylvania, and we partnered with fellow Radnor Club, the League of Women Voters, and we spoke with him over Zoom. And it was really cool to hear from someone who is directly working on environmental policy. And I've always been very interested in environmental policy because that is where some of the most impactful change is made. So it was really cool to learn firsthand from him. And then here are a bunch of our ideas for 2022. So a fun idea we have is to write personal letters to local elected officials to show support from students. And we think that by giving personal messages, this will kind of shift their mindset and give them like some thought before they make changes for our future. So we really hope that that impacts them positively. And as I already mentioned, a video supporting Ready for 100. Another fun idea is poster making, where we would further educate Radnor High School. We could put the posters around the school with like different climate statistics to show the real climate change. Like currently, we need to make changes now. We could also just promote Ready for 100 and just get more communication about that out there. Next week, we are going to have a clothing drive where we allow the students to give us some clothes that maybe no longer they need, and we can recycle it at this local institution. So a fun idea I came up with is a raffle where students can put their name in a bowl and then they would get the chance to win a reusable material. And I actually found this really cool reusable material. It's beeswax wrap. And I think that by making it like a fun experience, it like encourages people to be more sustainable personally. And then a thrifting trip is a team bonding experience that I really think would be fun maybe in the summer. And finally, a bottle cap mural where we could take tops of plastic bottles and create like a beautiful mural. And that sounds like a great idea. Next slide. Okay, and then lastly, I have the Instagram for Action Earth if any of the other high schools want to check it out and reach out to us. I would love to reach out with you guys. And yeah, so if you want to like take a picture of it, it's really simple. It's just Action Earth. And I hope you guys leave your Instagrams in the chat so I can reach out with you guys too. Okay, next slide. So yeah, that's it. I want to thank the Darby Creek Valley Association again for having me. They've always been so supportive of Action Earth the past few years. And I hope I get to speak again next year. Thank you so much. And if anyone has any questions, I will check the chat or speak now. I think we have Aurora talking next.
Thank you, Kate. Great presentation. You maybe forgot to mention that beeswrap material is an excellent material. It's used for preserving food, usually in a refrigerator, just so people are aware.
Thank you. Yeah, exactly.
That's wonderful. Any other comments or questions?
No, I think this is a great start, though. You know, this year we've had 3 high schools come and talk. Hopefully next year we can have 4 or 5. You know, we can really get you guys connected, and possibly even we can start, you know, we start talking about also bringing in some of the universities in the watershed, talk about the work they're doing. So we can see a progression from the high school level to the collegiate level. So we're really hoping that we can get something started with you guys being the pilot.
Yep. I will have to say as well, George, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say how I was impressed with the depth and breadth and intensity of all our presenters and what they're into and what they've come up with. And it's just amazing.
Absolutely.
Yeah, agreed. And something to think about, guys, for next year is hopefully this will be the last 100% virtual meeting that we'll have. Hopefully we can do person to person, face to face next year. And one of the things that we always have, we did face to face, we also have poster presentations. So great opportunity for you guys to kind of develop and improve on your skills of speaking in front of people, and also for developing the skills for putting posters together, which are all very important aspects of moving forward in the science discipline or in any real world experience. So, you know, really think of this as a really great opportunity for everybody.
Yeah. Great. I wanted to say that everyone has just been so articulate and smooth, and just, it's, besides obviously the great work, it's just wonderful to hear just how well you all are doing, and those are skills that will carry through your life. So congrats with all of that. All right, unless there are any other questions, then we will move into our short DCVA blasts. And yes, I think Aurora, you are first up.
Yep. Thanks, Jaclyn. And thank you to all the speakers so far. This has been just, I feel like we've had just so many good speakers. I've enjoyed all the presentations, and I'm especially inspired when I see the high school presentations, just because, you know, like they said, it's their future, and to see them working to improve it is just so inspiring. So thank you guys. I just wanted to give a quick update about our annual cleanup. It is DCVA's biggest kind of event of the year, and there is, I guess, I wanted to highlight one change this year. In prior years, we usually have it all on one date in April. And this year we are allowing cleanup captains to pick from multiple Saturdays in April. I thought the easiest way to share this would just be to kind of share my screen real quick to show you on the website. If you want to find out more information or get involved with the cleanup, you just go to dcva.org. Right here is Watershed Cleanups. And so far, we already have more than 30 sites scheduled for April, and you can see they're organized by the date. So you just go in, you click on whatever you're interested in, and you can register to volunteer to help us with this cleanup. And you can also, we have about 30 sites so far. We still have capacity to support more cleanups. So if anyone wants to be a cleanup captain and they know of a site that needs cleanup, you just go and click right on this top area, fill out this form. It'll take you to a Google survey form. It just helps organize the information, how I can contact you, and then we'll make sure you get the supplies you need: gloves, t-shirts, trash bags. We will work with you to make sure you have everything you need. That's another advantage I'm hoping for having it spread out throughout the month, is rather than having dozens of logistical, supplies needed to get to all these places on one day, we can hopefully be a better support for our cleanup captains by spreading them out a little bit. And then you can also visit multiple sites if you want to. I also just want to mention our sponsors so far. We have several great sponsors helping us put on this event every year, including municipalities who've helped pitch in, Aqua Pico. They're all here, and we are grateful for their support. And if anyone knows of any other local businesses or organizations that want to help support this event, it's a big one. So we can use all the help we can get. And I think that's it. If anyone has any questions, drop them in the chat or yes.
Do we have someone that's providing dumpsters, or is that going to be through the townships, or how's that going to work?
In the past, we have had dumpsters at certain sites. We noticed last year they weren't being utilized as much as we expected. So we were going to try to avoid using dumpsters unless there's a site that, you know, is deemed especially, you know, there's a whole lot of trash and we may need it there. We'll definitely consider that. But this year,
Aurora, I was able to fill 2 dumpsters. One low dumpster, you know, about 5 feet high, and one enormous dumpster. Now, I'm not saying I'm even a captain yet this year, but I did fill dumpsters. So,
okay, you know, I didn't go to all the sites. That was just what I was hearing. But absolutely, we will consider dumpsters for sites that need it.
yeah, thank you.
Aurora, I would like to throw out the idea to solicit maybe Home Depot, maybe Lowe's, big box stores, to contribute some of their paper leaf bags to our effort instead of using these plastic bags. And we can talk about that later personally. Thank you.
Okay, that's a
Great idea.
Thank you for that.
Those box stores both also have their own advertising brand plastic bucket, and smaller people and kids would be very happy to use a bucket rather than a big trash bag or carry the stuff back somewhere.
Totally.
Yeah, you know, I see that some of my neighbors who do some small do-it-yourself stuff can get these kind of larger big bags for like Home Depot. They're not dumpster size, but they're very large, and then Home Depot will come and then take them. So that's something you may want to consider also. They're just these big bags that are probably 10 feet by 10 feet, and you just fill them up. So that's something you may want to think about. Again, just to kind of avoid some of the plastic use that we've done in the past.
Yeah, these are all great ideas. Thank you. I really appreciate it. And I'm just going to drop my email in the chat too. If anyone has thoughts or questions or anything and doesn't want to speak up right now, you can feel free to email me anytime. So, thank
Alan,
you.
you're next.
Okay, so I just want to spend a minute or two talking about the Stream Watch program. We've been doing this for over 20 years. There are 2 parts to it, where we actually get into the stream in spring. And then the fall or the winter, we go into the environmental lab at the Haverford Reserve, and we identify the organisms, and we identify the water quality at that point in time when the organisms were collected. Last year, we were only able to do 1 part, and that was to collect the organisms. I didn't do the identification workshop just because of COVID, so I've got the samples in my basement, and I've got to get that processed before the next Stream Watch event, which is this coming April 9th. We're going to have 5 to 6 sites again. We'll start at Barton Park and work up the watershed. As always, this is a rain or shine event, so it's not allowed to rain that hard that day. For the most part, we've been very fortunate. We've only had 1 or 2 days where the stream has run high and fast, and we were still able to do it, but it was a little dicier. So stay tuned for more information. Aurora, on the what you just showed for the stream for the cleanup, I think there's also a spot there for the Stream Watch, wasn't there? So if you could kind of bring that up, you know, again, what I think that what I had there, so I'll give the information to Aurora, and hopefully that'll be an opportunity, a place for you to sign up. I also have developed my own distribution list over the years of people, and I usually send that around too with all the information. So stay tuned. You can click there to register. One of the things that so really looking forward to it. It's a lot of fun. It's been getting out in the stream, getting into the lab. For those folks who have done it in the past, they'll tell you don't have to be a rocket scientist or an aquatic entomologist to do this. We try to keep it as open as possible. There are a few of us who have experience. This is what we do, and we walk around and help out. So I know Aurora has had her kids there. We've had other people with their children there, even in the laboratory, and that it's really amazing to watch some of the kids really go to work there. And so we have kids of all ages that come to the workshop and to the stream. And I think though the kids probably much more enjoy getting out in the stream and getting some boots on and actually getting in the water. So April 9th, we'll get in the stream. Hopefully we can get folks out there. If you're interested, remember it's to register, and also make sure you bring your waders because you're going to get in the water. And that's all I have. If there are any questions about that. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Ellen, real quick, I just wanted to kind of reiterate what you just said, that you don't have to know a lot about anything really to show up and be shown how to help out, and you learn as you go. It was my very first thing I ever did with DCVA was just show up at this Stream Watch event, and that's how I started learning and getting involved. And now here I am working for DCVA. So
I'm just glad we didn't scare you away that day.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, like Alan said, my kids, that's actually one of them a few years ago, have attended, and it's just so fun and a great learning experience. So
yeah, and for the ecology clubs, this is a really good introduction into aquatic ecology. So really, guys, it'd be great if kind of pass this along. It's on the website. It'd be great to get some high school students in here. I know it's a little early, but you can come and go as you please. So when the high schoolers get up around 10:30 in the morning, there's still samples there to be processed. So there's always, and it's really just a good opportunity to start your network for it within the watershed, and also within the scientists that are within the group. And Erik, if you can kind of pass this along to the Riverkeeper, it'd be great to have some of you guys there to do this. Just a great way of interaction and outreach.
Alan, this is Scott again. I may have some additional 8th graders in the future years. I know they'll be ready this year, and also the Darby Library is starting a water club. They're doing some kind of sampling too, so I'll try to steer them to you probably next year. So okay,
that's fine. That's fine. The only thing that I always ask, if they're going to be kids, that the parents have to be along with them. Obviously, high schoolers, that's different. But middle schoolers are too cool to get to get with adults. So the high schoolers, obviously, you guys are always welcome, and then anyone's welcome. But children have to be accompanied by their parents.
Mm-hmm.
So
Great.
that sounds great. Thank you.
All right, Aurora, back up. You're going to share StreamSmart, correct?
Yes,
On behalf of Jamie.
Yeah, Jamie unfortunately had a change in her schedule and is unable to join us, but she basically just wanted me to share that our StreamSmart house call program, it's done in partnership with the PA Resources Council and Eastern Delaware County Stormwater Collaborative and Lormont Conservancy. I'll just share my screen again real quick. She wanted me to just share the website, streamsmarthouseholds.org. We encourage residents to go there and apply for an audit or an assessment of their property. And then we can advise them about how to better manage stormwater on their property, whether that's with rain gardens, sometimes rain barrels. Occasionally we've brought up downspout planters. I just got one of those in the past year. So, and it's been a, they continue, program continues on. We just got word of a Growing Greener grant to help expand the program. So that's really exciting, but we're also continuing to look for more grant funding opportunities so that we can expand our ability to provide the assessments to a greater area, or just encourage other areas to do the same type of program to mirror what we've already started here. So that's it.
Great. Am I on mute? Hold on. Oh no, I'm not. I was in a different screen looking at my agenda. All right, thank you. So I'll just give briefly about the technical assistance grant, which is really just monitoring the work that is happening at the Lower Darby Creek Area Superfund site. And obviously we see we're nearing completion for at least the land portion of the Clearview site. But there's definitely going to be more work as it relates to the Fallcroft site. And there isn't really a whole lot of community engagement there. So if you know of anyone that would be interested in learning more about that, please let us know. A good portion, I actually believe all of it, is located within the John Hines boundary, which is probably why a lot of people may not be aware of it. But that's something that will definitely be up and coming. And then of course the groundwater monitoring, as Josh had indicated earlier. So other than that, we're continuing to receive that technical assistance, which most of that money goes out to a consultant that reviews all the documents and gives us some good insights and weighs in on what else might need to happen. And that really has proven to be absolutely valuable over the years. So that is all I have there. Next up, I believe, is Lauren.
Hi, everyone. First off, I just want to say congratulations to all of the speakers. I have learned so much today, and I'm so grateful for everyone spending the time and putting together this amazing program. But I'm here to talk about the Darby Creek Headwater Community Science Monitoring Program, which kicked off last year. We're actually in the process of completing our 11th sample collection. So this is a program that is a partnership between DCVA, Willistown Conservation Trust, and Stroudwater Research Center. And we are working within our communities throughout the Darby Creek watershed to train and empower volunteers to collect data to help us gain a better understanding of what is going on within the watershed. So every 4 weeks, our intrepid team of volunteers goes out and collects data from temperature and conductivity measurements to collecting a water sample in the headwaters, at least, that is then given to Willistown Conservation Trust to be analyzed for total suspended solids. The biggest and most exciting outcome of this project has been the community development of our volunteers. They've been taking excellent photographs every 4 weeks. And I know there's a handful of volunteers on the call. So Deirdre, I see you. Let's see, sorry, I might be missing some folks, but we have 8 volunteers who are out collecting now, and 10 more on the line to be trained up on March 5th. So far, the majority of our data collection has shown that temperature, erosion, and chlorides are a major problem in our headwaters. So we have 1 volunteer right now on Ithin Creek, and that's our most downstream sample collection point. And we're hoping with our new suite of volunteers that we will be able to extend our monitoring further downstream to really beef up our understanding of what's going on within the waterway. And if you're interested in learning more, there is a whole bunch of training tutorial videos on the DCVA website. And I apologize for not having my camera on. It's not working today. But you can go and see what we are interested in doing, what goes into the data collection and training. And if you want to join our team, feel free to reach out to Aurora or to email me directly. So that's kind of all we have. So if there are any questions, feel free to pop them in the chat, but I want to be respectful of everyone's time and thank you again so much for the chance to share this awesome volunteering opportunity.
Thanks, Lauren. I shared my screen real quick just to show everyone how to find it. Sometimes it's easier with a visual at dcva.org. If you go to citizen science/streamkeepers and you click there, you'll see a whole bunch of training videos. And there's Lauren with a mask, but since you can't see her video. Yeah, so, and I think she's going to drop her email in the chat, or you can also just email me. My email is also in the chat to find out more.
George?
I'm a member of the Alliance for Watershed Education, which is a Delaware River Alliance, 23 organizations. And one of the things that we've done internally in the last year that I just noticed when you put that page up is we've changed the name of our citizen science programs to community science programs because at least in areas where there are immigrants and so on, the term citizen says, oh, someone's going to be taking our green card if we come to participate.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And I mean, that sounds a little woke and politically correct, but it is a movement in the area.
Yep, excellent point. That is true. I have heard this in many places where they are changing the names and even just using that term citizen, even with other contexts or articles, it is important to recognize that. Thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, and that was my camera's working. Oh, happy day. The choice to use the word community was very intentional because we wanted to build a feeling of ownership and connection to the watershed specifically. And so we wanted to make sure that with all of the work that we were doing, it wasn't a perception that we were coming in and telling folks what they needed to be doing, but rather providing the tools and understanding and learning how to see and interact with the waterway to learn that it builds a sense of community around it. So it is a really, it is such a small change, but it does seem to build more of a sense of friendship when it comes to the work that we're doing and open sharing and open platform data. So I fully respect it. I know I'm not a linguist and I absolutely hate the language. I'm a biologist, so I'm sure that I know that there's a big discussion around it, but yeah, it's a really important distinction. And our goal really is to build those connections, build that understanding, and help residents become good stream advocates. Because the more eyes we have on the health of our waterway, the more rapidly we can start to understand what the stressors are, where those pressure points are, and how we can work together to improve the water quality from the headwaters all the way down to John Hines.
Very good, great. And there are a couple comments in chat as well. Last up, Peter.
Hi, everybody. Just going to say a few words about rain gardens. So Have a Rain Garden program is finished its 7th year in 2021. We have about 70 rain gardens built. We're back up in 2021 to 10 rain gardens installed during the year. We are thus far staying volunteer powered. And I say that because I'll give a little update on Upper Darby Rain Garden. So Upper Darby started, I think, with 3 rain gardens in 2020. You know, 2020 for us was actually a slower year because we sort of hit the brakes a little bit, and we built 7 rain gardens in 2020 because of the concerns over COVID, until, you know, we were sure that we had protocols in place and so forth. But Upper Darby is experimenting with sort of landscaper aided installations, and so they installed 7. You know, of course, there's a budget associated with that. So I think the landscaper does the soil work, and then the planting is done by volunteers. So I put in have a Rain Gardens email address if anyone does want to volunteer. I know there's a lot of folks on in this meeting that have volunteered. I saw Nora Schmidt. I wanted to give a shout out to her. She's on the core team, and she is a tremendous help in doing assessments and doing designs. And so we're a very bootstrapped organization. We pretty much do everything. She supervises installations, and so people like Nora are essential, and people who come out for the planting are essential. I'm going to put in the chat, there is an upcoming rain garden workshop. We do one every spring, and it's a pretty intense workshop, so not for the timid. It's like 3 hours, and it's really designed to give you in-depth, how do you
yeah, you can put it on the lid here.
Sorry?
Somebody just didn't mute themselves. Go ahead, Peter.
Okay. So I was going to do a quick share of the video that we were looking at before. All right, I'm just going to share screen and see if I can get there. Are you guys seeing it? Anybody?
I am not seeing it.
Not seeing it.
You didn't hit share screen yet, Peter.
Okay, I thought I did. All right. Oh, I didn't hit the share button.
Right.
Okay. Stay tuned. All right, so this is just a time-lapse video of the garden that Haverford High School did the install on. And it's probably still queuing, and
it's starting.
Yay. Okay.
Well, it's started screen. There you go. Now hit play.
All right, so this is basically one very long day and about another half day of rain garden installation. And so this was a very ambitious rain garden right across from the high school. You see the rototilling. We actually moved an existing stone block wall back closer to the porch out to close to the sidewalk. And then you see the whole process of rototilling and forming soil berms, flattening out the bottom. It sounds a lot easier when it's going by in 2 minutes, doesn't it? Shade. It does get hot out there sometimes. Mulch. Okay, and now we're going into planting. And so people can come out, and we have people that are interested in doing the heavy lifting work during the initial part of the build, and then we have people that are interested in doing the planting during the latter part of the build. And one of the things that we did adjusting for COVID was stretching out the build. We used to build in like half a day, and now we stretch it out to a whole day. And so we have more time slots, less people on site. And so our builds now generally go 6 to 8 hours in and out. And then this is what it looks like when it's done. Yay. All right, and thanks to, by the way, this is not our video production, thanks to Haverford High School Environmental Club. So that's it.
It is. It's just absolutely wonderful. They're doing this. It's great. George, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I feel like I'm commenting on everything, so I apologize, but I wanted to give a shout out to Steve Lockhart. I got to know him through the Upper Darby Rain Garden project, and he was very useful and participated in an installation in our neighborhood. And then he was very active when we needed some stormwater control down at the Lower Swedish Log Cabin. So thank you, Steve. I saw he was on earlier. I don't know if he's still on, but thank you to Steve.
And somebody who has the Upper Darby Rain Garden email, I don't have it for some reason. Steve keeps me in the dark. I guess he thinks I'm busy enough with Haverford Rain Gardens.
It's great. Well, thanks again to all of our speakers. I know several had to leave, but definitely a big round of applause for everyone that gave presentations today. They were fantastic. And the recordings will be available, or the PowerPoint. We are recording the session as well. Thanks again to Alan and Aurora for putting today together, and also to all of our board members who, you know, I will say it's the best board I've ever seen on the planet. Everybody's just so dedicated and tends, and, you know, has been here for so many years. I don't find anything that's comparable. All right. And of course, especially thank you to everyone that's joined our meeting today. And if you're a member, thank you, thank you. And if you are not, please join this wonderful team. With that said, we will close our annual meeting for members and guests and move right into our board business meeting, which again should not take too long. Many people are welcome to stay on. We will cover last year's annual meeting minutes, our nominations for re-upping existing as well as the new board members, and then our ribbon of green award. Am I blanking on anything else? Considering we had the financial report already in our annual report, I don't believe we need to approve anything since that.
I think you got everything. Suggest we just take a quick 10-minute break, give everybody a body break.
So right at 12:30 is okay?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Just to let you know, I probably need to duck out at about 12:50 for another meeting.
Okay. Like I said, it shouldn't take long.
Good chance we'll be done by then.
Yeah. Usually we are. If we were in person, then it might take a little bit longer, chatting, whatever else. I was going to joke and say thank you to Tony for the virtual food. It's delicious.
It's virtually good.
It's virtually good.
We missed the real food.
Yes.
Next year. The plan is next year we're going to go face to face.
Yeah.
Well, the whole problem with these Zoom meetings is that we don't get Tony's wonderful baked oatmeal. And now you've changed the schedule, and I thought there was going to be some way she was going to supply lunch for us, and it's not happening. So, you know.
Oh yeah, personal delivery drop off to everyone. I will say this.
Well, hold on. I don't see her, so maybe she's out making a delivery.
Yeah.
Yeah, good luck.
She would have had to been making deliveries the whole meeting to make it.
I know.
All right,
I will say this. If we have to do this in fashion like this, I know organization, what they did was gave people free items, and it was delivered ahead of time to their home. Actually, it was bottles of wine or beer, you know, which, hey, we can do that.
Sounds good to me.
Right? Instead of food.
I've done virtual happy hours where that's happened. It's actually a lot of fun.
Isn't that when you're trying to get votes, though? You do that kind of stuff, you know, deliver food, beer,
votes,
whatever.
Fundraising.
Votes are money.
Yeah.
Votes are money.
Yeah. Right.
I don't know, with the wine and beer, that's going to be a raucous meeting.
Yeah. Well, that's if you choose to drink it first thing in the morning, but
Speak for yourself. Girl Scout cookie time, though.
We got some Irish here, right?
Irish, Puerto Rican, you know.
All right, 12:30.
Yeah, you could go. If people want to stay and chat, they're welcome to. Got nowhere to go.
Hey, Jaclyn.
Yeah.
Maybe as part of the meeting, could mention that Lauren had sent out the board engagement survey and just remind people, you know, that to look for it.